Chapter 931. At the end of the first rehearsal, Eric's surprise at finding Victoria Adams in the crowd of MV actors had mostly dissipated. He only felt that this matter was very interesting, but he didn't immediately interact with Victoria Adams like many people envied or expected. Carolyn and Melanie went forward to help Eric take off the heavy Stan Nikon equipment from his body. Eric called the main creators and the 5 members of the Spice Girls over. A group of people gathered around the workbench in the corner of the studio, watching the video replay of the first rehearsal and discussing various details that needed to be improved. As it was the first rehearsal, there were many areas that needed to be improved. The group of people discussed for about half an hour before dispersing and making adjustments according to the results of the discussion. Eric waited for everyone to disperse, and continued to stay in front of the workbench alone. He operated the computer in front of him and watched the video replay. From time to time, he would write down some reflections on the lens in front of him. Carolyn placed a cup of warm coffee in front of Eric's hand. She didn't say anything, and quietly sat down beside Eric. She looked at him carefully, studying the camera and taking notes seriously with a little satisfaction on her face. Melanie, who wasn't far away, saw Carolyn sitting beside Eric and couldn't help but sigh. After thinking for a while, she walked over to Simon Fuller, who was directing the staff to adjust the set. She called him over and asked in a low voice, "Simon, what's the name of that girl just now?" Simon Fuller was also a smart person. He thought that Eric had asked Melanie to ask, so he also lowered his voice and said, "I just asked. Her name is Victoria Adams. Melanie, is Williams treating her to a meal? I can arrange it right away." Melanie resisted the urge to roll her eyes. Why were all these men like this? She quickly shook her head and said, "It's not like that. Simon, what do you think of Carly?" Carolyn had always been sincere and courteous to everyone around her. Coupled with her identity as the daughter of a noble family, although they hadn't interacted much in the past few days, Simon Fuller had a good impression of Carolyn. He couldn't help but have a little more respect in his tone as he said, "Miss Wilson is a great girl." Melanie gestured towards Eric and Carolyn and said, "Hey, Simon, you can definitely see that Carly likes Mr. Williams very much. So, do me a favor and make that, Victoria Adams disappear, okay?" Simon Fuller followed Melanie's gaze. He could naturally feel Carolyn's feelings for Eric. However, Melanie's words made him realize that this female assistant was acting on her own initiative to think of her best friend. After hesitating for a moment, Simon Fuller advised, "Melanie, if you're really thinking of Miss Wilson, I feel that you shouldn't do this. It's too obvious. I'm afraid that Mr. Williams wouldn't like the people around him acting on their own initiative. Moreover, you should have a little more confidence in Mr. Williams. He's a very professional person." Melanie finally couldn't help but roll her eyes. She thought to herself, "That's because you haven't seen him when he's not professional." Simon Fuller wasn't willing to help. Melanie knew that if she went to find someone else, the result would probably be the same. She could only give up on the idea of driving Victoria Adams away. However, she still couldn't help but secretly size up Victoria Adams among the actors. She really couldn't see what this girl had that attracted Eric. Her skin wasn't white enough, her face wasn't sweet enough, and she wasn't tall enough. She wasn't short enough either. She didn't conform to her boss's aesthetic standards at all. However, after thinking about it carefully, Melanie suddenly realized that she really couldn't understand Eric's aesthetic standards. Eric naturally didn't know what Melanie wanted to do in private. Of course, even if he knew, he would just laugh it off. Melanie wanted to protect Carolyn, and Eric actually wanted to do the same. Eric didn't have any special feelings towards Victoria Adams, who would never be Victoria Beckham again. Since the other party had so coincidentally appeared among the cast of the wannabe MV, Eric gradually turned a blind eye to it. The staff in the studio adjusted the set and actors according to the results of the discussion just now, and then the rehearsal continued. For the next week, everyone spent their time in this kind of repetitive practice. Every day, starting from 9 a.m. until 5 p.m. Although on the third day, many people felt that the rehearsal effect was already very good, and it was enough for them to film on the spot. However, Eric didn't ask them to stop, so naturally, no one raised any objections. After all, Eric Williams was now less than 30 years old, and he had already created an achievement that no one present could reach. However, he still carried a set of Stan Nikon camera system that weighed nearly 30 pounds every day, and repeatedly practiced more than 10 times. Just the amount of exercise alone was more than anyone present. In this kind of situation, everyone involved in the shooting put themselves in his shoes. If they had a net worth of hundreds of billions of dollars, why would they be willing to do this kind of tiring and boring work? If they could lie down, they would definitely not sit down. Therefore, everyone only admired him for this kind of boring practice, and they had no complaints. In order to accumulate more experience in shooting long scenes, Eric would often change the shooting method when he was sure that the MV rehearsal was almost done. Sometimes, he would ask the MV actors to leave, and the 5 girls would perform alone. Sometimes, he would ask the actors to improvise a play based on their roles in the MV. During this time, Eric would deliberately take out a plot from Birdman and let the actors perform it. He would practice the camera techniques in Birdman that he remembered. While the wannabe MV was shooting, Simon Fuller also began to promote the release of the Spice Girls' first single. Since July, when the Spice Girls started to recruit members, this girl group that was said to be created by Eric Williams attracted everyone's attention. Recently, although the British media had been speculating about Eric's reason for coming to London, most of the topics were related to the Spice Girls. This further increased the media's and public's attention to the group. Therefore, Simon Fuller planned to strike while the iron was hot and release the first single as soon as possible after the filming of the wannabe MV was completed. When Eric finished a week of rehearsals in the Pineland studio and moved to London for live shooting, the British branch of Firefly Records, which had been established for a few months, officially announced the release date of the Spice Girls' first single, October 27th. Due to repeated rehearsals in the studio, the live shooting was very smooth. It only took 2 days for the MV to be completed. At this time, the news that Eric personally served as the photographer for the wannabe MV was finally dug up by the British tabloids, and it quickly caused a sensation. A few months later, Casino Royale was still in the UK. The cumulative box office in the UK had reached more than $93 million. Although it still couldn't catch up with the record set by Titanic, this box office was enough to squeeze into the top few box office rankings in the history of the UK. Casino Royale experienced the second stage of its large-scale release in September. The global box office exceeded $900 million and was steadily moving towards the goal of $1 billion. Under such circumstances, Eric personally shot the music MV, which naturally made many film and music fans look forward to it. On October 11th, after the filming of Wannabe was completed, Eric handed everything over to Simon Fuller. He was not in a hurry to return to Los Angeles. Instead, he stayed at the Pineland studio on the outskirts of London to continue the preparation work for Gravity. Because of the one-take shooting method, the post-production work of the wannabe MV was completed in only a week. Then, on October 20th, a week before the release of the wannabe single, the song's MV was officially released on major TV stations in the UK. Perhaps the anticipation was too high. Wannabe didn't seem to reach the point where the media and music critics were amazed. In the 1990s, the mainstream music genre in the UK was pop rock. Whether it was a solo singer or a singing group, most people would be more or less influenced by pop rock. However, Wannabe by the Spice Girls was a pop dance song that completely deviated from the mainstream music genre. It had nothing to do with pop rock at all. Moreover, most music critics felt that compared to Eric's previous amazing songs, Wannabe was very lacking in connotation. It was more like a mediocre pop song. Some media outlets directly attacked the Wannabe MV. Not only did they think that Eric's one-take shooting method was just a gimmick, there was nothing outstanding about it. They also commented very harshly that the 5 girls in the MV dressed like 5 slutty little prostitutes. Just when everyone thought that Eric Williams might fail this time, the Wannabe single was released on October 27th. In just 4 days, the single album sales exceeded 100,000 copies. Then, the album sales in the first week finally reached 160,000 copies. Not only did it easily rush to the top of the UK singles chart, it even surpassed the number 2 single by more than 90,000 copies. For a moment, all the media and music critics who were originally not optimistic about the Spice Girls shut their mouths and began to investigate what had happened. Almost naturally, most people's first thought was that Eric might have cheated by buying the chart. However, after some digging, no one could find any substantial evidence. At the same time, all over the UK, whether it was the commercial streets of the big cities or the small towns in the remote suburbs, many people unknowingly felt as if they could hear the song "Wannabe" everywhere. When they walked down the street, they could hear some young people suddenly say, "Zigga zig ha." This was a very unpredictable interjection in "Wannabe," but it inexplicably made many people feel that it was very cool. In a short period of time, the Spice Girls 5 became the sexy idols in the hearts of British young people. At the same time, they also became the targets of the British paparazzi. The winner had everything. This was a famous saying in any field. As "Wannabe" showcased the power of a brainwashing song and swept the entire United Kingdom, the media, who originally disliked the song and the Spice Girls, gradually changed their direction. They began to praise the Spice Girls for perfectly combining dance pop with feminism and injecting a strong female independent style. When Eric saw this sentence in the Hot Songs chart magazine, he really wanted to find a prawn, tie an egg to an egg, and mail it to the music critic who wrote the article. The Spice Girls' success actually did not have any profound reasons. They were indeed the product of an assembly line operation, just as some media said. However, although many legendary musicians won the adoration of countless fans with rich cultural meanings of lyrics and music, for most ordinary people, music was ultimately just a form of entertainment. The Spice Girls precisely grasped the spirit of entertainment first very well. With a bright and lively image, simple and pleasant melody, and relaxed and funny lyrics, they quickly won the hearts of a large number of young people. After "Wannabe" became a hit, Eric gave the other songs that belonged to the Spice Girls to Simon Fuller and completely let go of this matter. According to the pre-drafted contract, when the second generation of the Fireflyer player was released in North America and Europe in April next year, the Spice Girls would not only become the European spokesperson of the Fireflyer player, but at the same time, their first album would be released online and physically at the same time as an exception. This would greatly promote the popularity and sales of the Fireflyer player in Europe. It was already winter in London in November, and the temperature in the suburbs was even colder. As usual, Rachel Weisz drove a large Jaguar Monarch to Pinewood Film Studio. Carolyn, who was wearing a white trench coat, was already waiting at the entrance. The girl politely said a few words to the guard, and the gear lever at the entrance was raised. "Rachel, a superstar like you is finally willing to come and see me." Carolyn opened the door to the front passenger seat and sat in the car. The corners of her mouth curved into a smile as she began to tease Rachel. Rachel started the car and drove into the studio. One of her hands quickly reached out and pinched Carolyn's face. She deliberately said in a hoarse voice, "Baby, not only am I here to see you, but I'm also planning to bring you home tonight." Carolyn shrunk her neck and avoided Rachel's claws as she laughed. Rachel quickly parked the car in the parking lot of the studio. After getting out of the car, she gave Carolyn a big hug and said, "All right, where's Mel?" "She's inside. Let's go over." Carolyn pointed out the parking lot. Rachel reached out and held Carolyn's hand as they walked out. She asked, "I heard that Eric has been living here for a month. What has he been secretly busy with?" "His new movie. Well, I can't tell you too much. But it's definitely a very good movie." Rachel lowered her head again as if she wanted to kiss Carolyn's face. Seeing the girl shy away, she said, "Yes, Eric Williams' movie is definitely very good." The two girls chatted casually as they arrived at the studio that Eric had used as his studio. The set for the rehearsal of "Wannabe" had been completely removed. However, at this time, in the studio, other than the two modified orange robots, there were many other strange equipment. Among them, the most eye-catching was the large box that was 5 meters tall and made up of many 1 square meter LED screens. At a glance, Rachel saw Eric and a few others standing in the large box. She asked curiously, "Carly, what's that?" "A light box," Carolyn explained. Seeing that Rachel still didn't understand, she said, "It's used to simulate the lighting environment in space." Eric's new movie uses ordinary lighting methods, but it's very difficult to accurately simulate the lighting environment in space without any diffuse reflections. So, he intends to use this method and directly play a simple space scene on the LED screens around the lightbox. This way, when the actors perform inside, it's exactly the same as if they're in space. Just as Carolyn was explaining the use of the surrounding equipment to Rachel, Eric walked over with Melanie and hugged Rachel. With a somewhat joking tone, he said, "Rachel, a superstar like you is finally willing to come and see me." Rachel stared blankly for a moment before suddenly bursting into laughter. She seemed to feel that it wasn't very satisfying, so she turned it into a hearty laugh. She looked as if she wanted to squat on the ground while clutching her stomach. Carolyn didn't expect Eric to say the same thing as her. After thinking about it again, perhaps because they had been together for a long time, her words just now were obviously imitating Eric's usual joking tone. Realizing that Rachel might have guessed this, Carolyn's small face immediately turned red. She couldn't wait to find a place to hide. Eric didn't know what Rachel had found funny. Looking at Carolyn's reaction, he roughly guessed that this matter had something to do with her. He didn't ask much and only said, "All right, Rachel, be more ladylike. Otherwise, I'll take a photo of your current appearance and sell it to the paparazzi." Rachel took a deep breath and finally stopped laughing. She straightened her body and couldn't help but say, "Eric, you've led Carly astray again." "All right, I'm guilty." Eric shrugged his shoulders and pointed to the workbench. "Let's go over and sit. Speaking of which, why are you free today?" "I'm here to see Carly and Mel," Rachel said as she sat down at the workbench. Looking at the pictures of space scenes on the table, she said, "Eric, are you planning to shoot a space movie?" "Yes." Eric nodded. "A space disaster movie." Rachel swept a few glances at the table before noticing a concept map that had been rendered. She took it over and gave it a look. This was a realistic simulation map that had been created based on the drafts that Carolyn and Melanie had seen on the plane back then. Feeling the feeling of the two astronauts being connected by several thin lines, Rachel couldn't help but become interested. She straightforwardly asked Eric, "Eric, is there a role suitable for me in this movie?" Chapter 932. Eric felt Rachel's expectant gaze and shook his head. "It would be better if you were a few years older. This is a movie with a female lead. There are no supporting roles, and I hope that the female lead can't be younger than 30 years old." Rachel Wasey nodded. Although she was a little disappointed, she was not too disappointed. After Titanic, she had no lack of film contracts. After casually chatting about Eric's movie, she changed the topic and joked, "I heard that you've been in London for more than a month, just for that hot girl group. Wannabe, sounds really interesting. I even bought a disc for it. But, what does zigga-zigga mean?" "You've got me there," Eric said. He actually remembered that zigga-zigga meant shit and cigars. It was not a good phrase, so it was replaced with a meaningless tone. However, there was no way he could explain the allusion to Rachel. He could only vaguely say, "I think it's easier to add this line after the lyrics." Carolyn was sitting next to Rachel. She noticed Eric's expression when he spoke. She knew that Eric was just brushing Rachel off. He must know, but he just didn't want to explain it to Rachel. Looking at Rachel and Melanie next to her, Carolyn realized that she was the only one who knew this little secret. The corners of her mouth couldn't help but curl up. Rachel was just asking casually. She was not as curious about this string of characters as the media and fans outside. Since Eric didn't want to say, she didn't want to get to the bottom of it. Instead, she said, "Firefly Group has so many things to do. Is it really okay for you to not return to Los Angeles for so long?" "I'm the boss. As the boss, if I can't do whatever I want, then what's the point of living?" "What about you? What have you been busy with recently?" "I just finished a guest role in a movie. I just came back yesterday. I plan to go back to Los Angeles after Christmas," Rachel said. She reached out and hugged Carolyn intimately. "Also, Eric, how about giving Carly and Mel a day off? I want to go shopping with them in the city." "No problem." Eric nodded readily and said, "But you're a superstar now. Aren't you afraid of being surrounded by people?" "Hee hee, I just need to disguise myself a little." I can get rid of all the paparazzi by myself today. Then go and play. You can come back whenever you want. I don't have anything important to do recently anyway." Rachel nodded. Just as she was about to leave with Carolyn and Melanie, she suddenly thought of something and said, "Eric, why don't you come with us?" Eric shook his head. "I'm afraid of being surrounded by people. I'd better not go." Hee, what did you say just now? If I can't do whatever I want to do, what's the point of living? Rachel seemed to be suddenly interested and said, "So, let's go together. Don't worry, we won't drag you along as a human-shaped credit card." When Carolyn heard Rachel's suggestion, she was tempted as well. "Yeah, Eric, come and play with us." The ferocity of the British paparazzi was world famous. However, Rachel's plan was only to shop and eat. She didn't have the intention to wander around the streets with great fanfare. Eric thought for a while and agreed. After leaving Rachel's Jaguar Monarch in the parking lot of Pinewood Film Studio, Eric borrowed 2 inconspicuous Mercedes-Benz business cars. He brought a group of bodyguards and rushed to London with Rachel and the other 2 women. Because they spent a lot of effort to dress up and only shopped in some branded stores in a very low-key manner for the whole afternoon, although it was inevitable that they would be recognized by a few people, there were no problems. In the evening, the 3 women, who had almost filled the trunks of the 2 Mercedes-Benz business cars, were about to choose a restaurant for dinner. When they passed by the famous Harrods department store in Kensington, Rachel became interested again and planned to pick a few cosmetics. Eric ordered the driver to stop the car at the side of the road and followed Rachel and the others into Harrods department store. Speaking of which, Harrods department store, which specialized in luxury brands, was the family business of Diana's previous boyfriend, Dodie Fade. If it weren't for Eric's intervention, Dodie Fade and Diana's memorial would have been set up in this department store. Now, although the 2 of them went their separate ways, they were both living well. Not long ago, Diana was interviewed at another charity party in Kensington Palace. When she was asked about her impression of Eric, she bluntly said to a reporter that Eric Williams is a very rude guy. Fortunately, the reporter who interviewed Diana happened to be from News Corporation's The Sun. Diana's evaluation of Eric did not appear in the newspaper. However, the recording of the interview somehow fell into the hands of Elizabeth. Naturally, Eric was ridiculed again. Although it was a workday, Harold's department store had a lot more customers than those branded stores. Eric did not want to be too conspicuous with the 3 women, so he greeted them and casually strolled around the cosmetics area on the first floor. As he was walking, a female voice suddenly came from beside him. She asked politely, "Sir, would you like to try the latest Armani men's perfume?" Eric looked over and recognized the saleswoman in front of him. He immediately raised his eyebrows. What a coincidence. We meet again. When Victoria Adams saw Eric stop, she immediately smiled and raised the bottle of perfume in her hand, intending to spray some on Eric. However, when she noticed the strange expression of the man in front of her, she could not help but take a closer look at him. Soon, her eyes widened and she asked with uncertainty, You are Mr. Williams?" Eric heard her almost scream and quickly made a shushing gesture. Victoria Adams realized that she had lost her composure. She awkwardly waved the perfume bottle in her hand and looked at Eric, who was wearing a pair of glasses and had a layer of stubble on his chin. For a moment, she didn't know what to say. More than half a month ago, Victoria was secretly excited for a few days when she felt that Eric's attitude towards her during the filming of the wannabe MV was a bit special. No matter what, it was definitely a great thing to be noticed by a big shot like Eric Williams. However, although she had good dreams for several nights, Eric did not say anything to her until the MV was finished. Although she had always wanted to find an opportunity to be more proactive, she could not find an opportunity to contact Eric alone. After the MV was finished, all the actors involved in the shooting naturally dispersed. It was inevitable that she was disappointed for a few days, but life had to go on. She could only continue to participate in various auditions while finding a job as a perfume promoter. Eric also curiously looked at Victoria, who was wearing a promoter uniform. He noticed that she dyed her hair black again and nodded. "Black hair looks more pleasing to the eye. However, aren't you an actress? Why are you here as a promoter?" Victoria Adams's expression was a bit blank. She graduated from an art school at the age of 20. In the past few years, she had only participated in a few stage plays and had not been able to find a stable job. Victoria Adams's eyes flickered a few times before she said, This is just a temporary job. I recently participated in a few auditions and am still waiting for news." "Oh." Eric nodded and found that there was nothing to talk about with the girl in front of him. He was about to walk away when there was a noise not far away. He could also hear shouts like, "Rose," and "Rachel." Clearly, Rachel and the other two had been discovered and surrounded by people. Eric looked at the three women who were surrounded by the crowd and did not rashly approach them. Instead, he took out his phone and quickly dialed the number of the bodyguards waiting outside, giving them a few simple instructions. A moment later, 4 burly bodyguards hurriedly walked in and separated the crowd around Rachel and the girls, protecting them as they left Harrod's department store. Eric had just instructed the bodyguards to send Rachel and the others away and not to wait for him. Eric leaned against the counter in front of Victoria and waited for a while. After confirming that Rachel and the others had gone far away, he nodded to Victoria Adams and walked toward the door of the store. Victoria Adams stared blankly at Eric's back as he walked out and suddenly came to her senses. If she missed this opportunity, it would be difficult for her to make a name for herself in this lifetime. Putting down the perfume bottle in her hand, Victoria Adams ran out of the counter and chased after him. She softly shouted, "Mr. Williams." Eric stopped and looked at Victoria, who had chased after him. "What's the matter?" I, Victoria stuttered for a moment before she mustered her courage and said, "Can I treat you to a meal? It's working hours now. Are you planning to skip work?" Eric looked around and joked. Seeing the girl in front of him wringing her fingers in disappointment, he thought for a while and said, "Okay, but it's still my treat." Victoria Adams, who thought she was going to be rejected, suddenly raised her head and said, "Wait a moment, I'll go change my clothes." Eric smiled and nodded as he watched Victoria leave in a hurry. He sat down on the sofa next to him and casually picked up a newspaper to read. A few minutes later, Victoria, who was wearing a black sports jacket and blue jeans, walked over with a satchel on her shoulder. Eric put down the newspaper, got up and walked out with her. Victoria Adams followed Eric and glanced at his left hand that was casually inserted in the pocket of his casual pants. She wanted to hold it, but in the end, she couldn't muster up the courage. One of the Mercedes-Benz commercial cars waiting outside had already left. Seeing Eric walking out of the department store with an unfamiliar girl, the bodyguard in the front passenger seat quickly got out and helped them open the door. Victoria looked at Eric with some restraint before she got into the car under his signal. Eric also got into the car and asked Victoria next to him, "So, where do you want to eat?" Victoria Adams shook her head. "I don't care. Anywhere is fine. Then I'll treat you to Chinese food. It's very close to the Royal Garden Hotel. There is a very good Chinese restaurant there." After Eric finished speaking, he instructed the driver to drive. Suddenly, he remembered that he had to make a reservation first. The Royal Garden Hotel was at the exit of Kensington Garden Street. When he came to London in June for the premiere of Casino Royale, Eric went to the Minjiang restaurant in the Royal Garden Hotel several times. However, when he took out his phone, Eric helplessly realized that he didn't know the phone numbers of these restaurants. This kind of thing was usually done by the assistant or the woman beside him. Inexplicably, he felt a little guilty and didn't call Carolyn and the others to help him book a seat. Eric flipped through his address book a few times. Recently, he had been in frequent contact with Simon Fuller, so he called him and asked him to book a seat for him. Simon Fuller was definitely the most popular music manager in the UK in recent times. Victoria watched as Eric naturally called Simon Fuller to book a seat for them as if he was a subordinate. She felt a little more eager. It took less than 10 minutes to go from Harrods to the Royal Garden Hotel. However, when Eric walked into the Minjiang restaurant in the hotel, a waiter greeted him warmly and led the two of them to a window seat overlooking Hyde Park. "The roast duck here is very good, but I don't know if it suits your taste. You can also try other dishes." Eric casually ordered a dinner, handed the menu to the waiter, and recommended to Victoria. Victoria looked up and smiled at Eric, then obediently ordered a roast duck. After the waiter left, Eric looked at Victoria, who was still very restrained, and took the initiative to open the topic. Then, let's talk about you. I don't know you very well. Eric was a very talkative person. Under his guidance, Victoria Adams gradually opened up and talked about her life. After graduating from Wren Art School, I actually wanted to be a singer. For this reason, I even applied for a band. Later, I found out that the guy named Steve, who started the band, was actually a stripper. At that time, a group of people rehearsed in a very small studio north of the Royal Park. After a few months, the band didn't improve, and everyone unknowingly dispersed. In the past 2 years, I have been participating in various auditions. There were bands, commercials, movies, music MVs, and so on. However, my agent's attention was not on me, so there were no good opportunities. Victoria rambled on. Although she could feel that Eric had been listening to her carefully, she was still a little worried and asked, "Eric, do you feel that these things are very boring?" "No." Eric shook his head and smiled. "I am a director, so I like to listen to others talk about their lives. Maybe I can use it in a script someday." "Oh." Victoria nodded with relief and said, "Actually, I can feel that you shot the MV of Wannabe to prepare for your next movie, right?" "Yes, I plan to be the cameraman myself next time, so I used this MV to practice." "You want to be the cameraman yourself? I think the cameraman must be very tired. Just like the clothes you wear when you shoot, so heavy." "Well, that kind. Stan Nikon." "Well, that's it." Victoria was a little embarrassed and said, "I don't think it's necessary. You can hire someone to do it." "If I hire someone to do everything, then life will become more and more boring." Eric smiled and asked, "What about you? What are you going to do in the future?" Victoria's eyes flashed with anticipation. She wanted to say something, but she suddenly stopped. Perhaps it was because she had spent these years aimlessly that she really didn't think about the future. She summoned the courage to stop Eric at Harrods because she instinctively wanted to seize some opportunities. After thinking for a while, Victoria said, I don't know what I plan to do in the future, but Eric, what do you think of me being a singer?" Eric shook his head and smiled. "I'm afraid you can't take this path." In terms of musical talent, Victoria used to be the weakest in the Spice Girls. After losing the opportunity to join the Spice Girls, it was basically impossible for her to become a singer again. Eric remembered that Victoria had gained recognition in the fashion industry as a designer. However, without the fame of the Spice Girls and Beckham, it was probably impossible for her to gain a place in the fashion industry again. Seeing Eric shake his head, Victoria was a little disappointed. She hesitated and asked, "Eric, what do you think is suitable for me? Didn't you just say that your family runs an electrical appliance wholesale business? If you ask me, you should settle down and help your father take care of the business. Maybe you will become a strong woman in the business world in the future. Actually, I also know that most of the girls in the art school were better than me, but I'm always unwilling to live in obscurity like my parents. I want to be famous." Victoria was obviously very disappointed with Eric's answer. She sighed and said, "Eric, can I ask you a question?" "Of course." "That time, when you were shooting the Wannabe MV, why did you suddenly stop when you passed by me?" Eric shook his head and smiled. "Nothing, I just feel that you are like a person in my memory." "Oh, then, she must be very outstanding, right?" "Yeah, speaking of which, she should be a winner in life." "Winner in life? Very interesting. Then do you think, I can be a winner in life?" "It's hard to say. It depends on what you think is a winner in life. I just said that I want to be famous." Victoria said this and put down the cutlery in her hand. She looked at Eric with hope, and with a bit of pleading she said, "Eric, can you help me?" Chapter 933. In Victoria Adams's expectant eyes, Eric deliberately paused for a moment before saying, "To be honest, I don't like to help others very much. However, I happen to be in a good mood recently, so how do you want me to help you?" Victoria's eyes suddenly lit up. She wanted to say something, but she was stuck again. She didn't expect Eric to agree so quickly, and naturally, she wouldn't consider how Eric could help her. Eric looked at Victoria's completely overwhelmed look, smiled and thought about it. He said, "Well, since you are a dancer, you can be a backup dancer. How about Madonna's backup dancer? I know her, so it's not a problem to recommend you to be her contracted dancer. You know, Jennifer Lopez used to be Jenny Jackson's backup dancer. Many singers and celebrities in the circle have had this experience. For you, this is a good starting point." Victoria actually wanted to be a contracted singer or go to Hollywood to be an actress. She also knew that it was easy for Eric to achieve these. However, since Eric said his thoughts, Victoria was very sensible and did not refuse. Although Madonna had been going downhill in recent years, she was a world-class singer after all. It was indeed a good starting point to be her contracted dancer. At least it was 100 times better than her trying her luck all day long. Eric naturally saw Victoria's reluctance. If she had just chosen not to do it, Eric would not have given her any other help. Victoria's talent in all aspects could only be said to be average. Pushing her to Madonna was indeed because Eric was in a good mood recently. Otherwise, Eric was more likely to choose to be a bystander. Since his rebirth, too many people's fates have changed because of him. Some people have become famous, and some people are still unknown. It doesn't matter if there is one more or one less. Since Victoria agreed, the two talked about some details. After dinner, it was already 9 o'clock in the evening. They left the restaurant together and went to the parking lot. Victoria still got into the Mercedes-Benz business car first. She didn't forget the rumors that Eric was a playboy. Thinking that she might be brought back to his residence by Eric, she was nervous but also had some expectations. However, Eric didn't intend to get in the car. He just looked down at Victoria in the car and said, "If you can make it in time, I will leave the United Kingdom in a few days. I can bring you along on the way. Also, tell the driver where you live and he'll send you home." Victoria hurriedly got out of the car, grabbed her bag in her hand, and asked, "Eric, are you, planning to stay in a hotel?" "I'm not staying in a hotel. I have a place to stay on Garden Street. It's just a few steps away." Victoria realized that the Royal Garden Hotel was right next to Kensington Garden Street, which was filled with luxurious mansions. She was a little envious, but she suddenly felt a little unwilling. She said, "Then, can I go over and have a seat? Let's talk about it later. Forget it for today." Eric shook his head and refused. He wasn't in the mood to hunt for girls these days. Besides, Victoria Adams wasn't his type. After sending Victoria off, Eric went to the mansion on Garden Street to rest alone. He stayed in London for a few more days. On November 7th, he received a call from Chris from New York. Emily had given birth to a boy. Eric set off from London to New York. This year's Victoria's Secret fashion show was approaching. It was the busiest time of the year for the Ltd group. The day after Emily gave birth, she couldn't wait to return to work. In the end, her power was forcefully seized by her family and she was forced to recuperate in a manor in East Hampton. The manor was newly bought by Chris. It wasn't far from the residence of Eric's woman and children. It was also convenient for the two families to take care of each other. When Eric returned to East Hampton, Emily excitedly planned to arrange a child marriage for her chubby son, who she had just named Daniel, to Hawaii. Eric despised her fiercely and then firmly refused. This cunning woman had never mentioned anything about a child marriage before the child was born. Obviously, she was worried that if she gave birth to a daughter, she would marry her stupid son. Although Kevin had been much smarter than many children his age in the past 2 years under Virginia's careful guidance, there was no harm without comparison. In front of Hawaii, the little guy had never been able to be associated with the word smart. After accumulating several years of experience, this year's Victoria's Secret fashion show was scheduled for November 27th. The holding time and TV broadcast time were also shortened from the initial 1 month to 1 week. The broadcast time was scheduled for December 3rd. However, Eric couldn't stay in New York until Thanksgiving or the Victoria's Secret fashion show. He returned to New York on November 9th and stayed in East Hampton for less than a week before hurrying back to Los Angeles in the middle of the month. As the end of the year approached, there were more and more things that required his presence in the company. Moreover, the two hot year-end slots were approaching. During the summer break in the middle of the year, other than the animated film Finding Nemo, several live-action films such as Prison in the Sky, Jedi Cop 2, and The Forest of Mount Tai released by Firefly Group were not very successful in the North American box office. Fortunately, the overseas box office of Prison in the Sky and Jedi Cop 2 were very good. This allowed Firefly to recoup their costs in the box office and achieve profits. Similar to the summer break, the Thanksgiving and Christmas slots at the end of the year were still crowded. Firefly Group alone had released 3 heavyweight films such as Jurassic Park 3, Monster Power Company, and Rush Hour 2. In addition, MGM's Amazing Night at the Museum 2 had been postponed from the original summer break to the Thanksgiving slot due to various reasons. At the end of the year, Fox had Mira Mike's The English Patient and Spirit Hunter as the 2 leading Olympic films. In addition to the film matters, after 3 months of preparation, Firefly Electronics' Fireflyer Player Assembly Plant in Malaysia was officially put into production. When Eric returned to Los Angeles, the first batch of 100,000 Fireflyer players from the Malaysian factory had been shipped to San Francisco and would be quickly sold to all parts of North America. In the next month or so, the overall monthly production capacity of Fireflyer players would be close to 1 million units, which could basically meet the needs of the North American market. However, considering the upcoming expansion into the European and Asian markets next year, Firefly Electronics was still expanding the component supply chain and building a new assembly plant. When he put Victoria Adams into Madonna's dance team, Eric also received another piece of news. Madonna and Warner Records' lawsuit over digital music distribution rights that lasted more than half a year had also taken a turn for the better. Since Madonna had the upper hand in the lawsuit, Warner Records was worried that if they lost the lawsuit, it would become a case law, so they began to contact Madonna privately to seek an out-of-court settlement. Although many second- and third-tier singers were still unable to obtain individual digital music distribution rights from the record companies, most first-tier singers began to seek relevant supplementary agreements in an attempt to grasp the digital music distribution rights in their hands. Obviously, this actually gave Yahoo Music a lot of opportunities to attack them one by one. Chapter 934. In more than a month, Firefly Group's management had already drawn up a detailed schedule for the Real D plan and the 4200 plan. The start date of Iron Man was set for March next year, and the filming period was 3 months. After completing the filming of Iron Man in the first half of the year, the preparations for Gravity would also be ready. Eric would be able to invest in the production of Gravity in the second half of the year. From the start of filming to the completion of the final 3D and IMAX versions, 1.5 years would be enough. Therefore, the final completion date of the 2 plans was set at the end of 1999. Moreover, not only Gravity, but the Lord of the Rings trilogy, which had already completed the casting, was also confirmed to start filming at the beginning of next year. Due to the back-to-back shooting of the trilogy, the shooting period was as long as a year. After another year of post-production, the first part of the trilogy, The Lord of the Rings, was scheduled to be released at the end of 1999. An epic fantasy like the Lord of the Rings series was obviously suitable for the 3D and IMAX screens that pursued the visual experience, so Eric naturally wouldn't let it go. Gravity, and the first part of The Lord of the Rings, would guarantee that the 4,000 3D screens and 200 IMAX cinemas would have the resources for 2 blockbuster films. As for Spider-Man, which Cameron was in charge of, although according to the plan, this movie would also be completed at the end of 1999, Firefly Group did not have any expectations for Cameron to complete the movie according to the plan. Eric did not include this movie in the plan and planned to let Cameron do whatever he wanted. However, according to the schedule, as Marvel's first superhero movie, Iron Man, which was scheduled for the summer of 1999, could only be excluded from the first batch of 3D IMAX movies. The first part of Star Wars, Episode 1 and MGM's next 3 Agent Movie Universe blockbusters were also unable to catch up with the first wave of 3D IMAX. Eric could only express his regret. After all, many things could not be done overnight. When Eric returned to Los Angeles, Katzenberg had already completed the first piece of the 2 plans, the acquisition of Canada's IMAX company. In 1994, Wall Street investor Richard Gulford was optimistic about the prospects of IMAX. He used all his assets to obtain the controlling shares of IMAX and did his best to promote the commercialization of IMAX technology in theaters. However, due to the lack of support from Hollywood studios and several major theaters in North America, Richard Gulford's plan had almost no progress. IMAX technology was still limited to the screening of scientific and educational films in various museums. Eric had asked the company to invest a sum of money in IMAX for the research and development of the DMR technology used to convert ordinary movies into IMAX movies. Although IMAX saw a glimmer of hope, it did not substantially improve the company's performance. Before Firefly launched the acquisition, IMAX could be said to be heavily in debt. The entire company's market value on the Nasdaq market was less than US $200 million, but it owed a huge debt of US $150 million, including the US $30 million that Firefly had borrowed. Since Eric planned to bet on IMAX, Firefly naturally would not give up the dividends brought by the promotion of IMAX technology in the future. At the same time, the company did not want to be controlled by others in the process of promoting IMAX technology. Therefore, the management agreed that the company should be bought. However, Eric would not object to the acquisition of less than US $500 million. After a few years of hard work, IMAX was on the verge of bankruptcy. Although Richard Gulford felt that the acquisition of Firefly Group would bring earth-shaking changes to the company, he did not hold it tightly in his hands. After a few weeks of negotiations, Firefly finally paid US $230 million in cash and assumed IMAX's US $150 million debt. Because US $30 million of the US $150 million debt came from Firefly, the actual total amount of the transaction was only US $350 million. Praia Vista. Although the expansion plan of Firefly Studios had not officially started, the land west of Lincoln Avenue was already being cleaned up by many workers. After many revisions, the team of engineers responsible for the construction of the theme park finally came up with a satisfactory design of the aerial corridor. The entire aerial corridor would be 4 kilometers long and 20 meters high, which was roughly equivalent to a 7-story building. In order to make people who saw the aerial corridor not think of buildings like reinforced concrete viaducts, the entire corridor would be made entirely of steel and glass. Although the height of 20 meters would be easily dwarfed by many buildings in other metropolises, in Praia Vista, where the average height of a building was no more than 3 stories, once the corridor was completed, it would undoubtedly be the most eye-catching landmark within a radius of tens of kilometers. With a conservative cost of US $50 million, this will definitely be the most expensive building in the entire studio. However, I think that anyone who has seen the renderings will think that US $50 million is worth it. On this aerial corridor, the sea in the west, Fox Mountain in the east, Los Angeles Airport in the south, and Santa Monica in the north are all in sight. On the still uneven wasteland, Katzenberg and Eric walked side by side. At the same time, they were excitedly talking about the expansion plan of the theme park. Eric looked at the open land around him that was waiting to be developed and imagined the scene of the Firefly Studios theme park in the future. He suddenly understood why Michael Eisner had gradually built the Paris Disneyland from a budget of US $1 billion to US $5 billion. Eric had never been a person who liked grandiose achievements, but after listening to Katzenberg talk about the expansion plan of the Firefly Studios theme park, he couldn't help but want to build the scene described by the other party. The area of the land now was less than 1/10 of the 2,000 hectares of Paris Disneyland. However, just the aerial corridor would cost US $50 million. The total cost of the entire studio would definitely not be less than US $1 billion. The Firefly Studios theme park, the Real D, and the 4200 plan, the newly acquired IMAX, and the Hasbro company that was planned to be completely taken over. Although he had always wanted to slow down the expansion of the Firefly Group, unknowingly, the company was still developing rapidly. Eric casually kicked a stone under his feet and said, "Jeffrey, I don't have any opinions on the design of the attractions with the themes of Jurassic Park and A Nightmare on Elm Street. However, you should have seen the scenery designed by Peter Jackson for the Lord of the Rings series. I'm very optimistic about this project, so I hope that there must be enough space to build the theme of the Lord of the Rings series. Of course, I also think the design of the hole at the bottom of the bag is very interesting." Katzenberg nodded and said, "Speaking of this, didn't you plan to let Miss Kidman play the elf Queen Galadriel? You weren't here during this time, so we didn't know how to talk to her about this. About this, I've already discussed it with Nicole. You can just ask someone to sign the contract with her. The salary will be calculated at US $3 million. Katzenberg asked with some uncertainty, $3 million for 3 movies. Yeah. Eric nodded. For Nicole's current status, US $3 million for the Lord of the Rings trilogy was indeed a bit shabby. However, her role was similar to that of a guest star. US $3 million was actually the highest among all the actors. Eric was chatting with Katzenberg when an assistant of Katzenberg hurried over and said, "Mr. Williams, Mr. Katzenberg, the representative of Day Company is here. I have already asked someone to take them to install the equipment." During this time, the management had been thinking about how to reasonably reduce the budget for the 2 plans. A large part of the budget of US $1.6 billion would be the cost of updating the Real D movie projection system. Coincidentally, Texas Instruments was looking for the possibility of commercial promotion of the newly developed digital projector, so Katzenberg arranged this demonstration. The two listened to Katzenberg's assistant and walked to the east side of the cinema together. "I've already read the information." Although the digital projector prototype developed by Day Company can only reach 1280 by 1024 resolution, give them 2 years, I think it won't be too difficult for them to develop a device comparable to the 1920 by 1080 resolution of the film projector. As the two of them walked back together, Katzenberg began to talk about his opinion. "Jeffrey, have you thought about the fact that if we use digital projectors, we might be boycotted by the entire industry? Hollywood was only in North America, but the industry chain around film copying reached billions of dollars every year. If it was popularized worldwide, the number would be even larger." Katzenberg heard Eric's question and said with a teasing tone, "I still remember what you said at the Fireflyer Player Conference at the beginning of the year." Eric shrugged and said with a smile, "Okay, but I just don't think it's the right time to promote digital projectors." Eric had already read the information on the digital projector developed by Texas Instruments. Strictly speaking, Texas Instruments only developed the core DLP, digital light processing, technology, which could convert digital signals into optical signals for projectors. In his memory, many digital projectors or office projectors later used the DLP chip from Texas Instruments. However, just like the current digital camera, Eric was not very optimistic about the digital projector. Both technologies were in the early stages of development, which meant that whether it was a digital camera or a digital projector, even if it reached the corresponding resolution, it was certainly far from comparable to film in terms of color reproduction. Film used a chemical method to record colors. Even if this method did not reach the level of biological eyeballs, it was far better than the immature digital technology. To give a simple example, in a dimly lit environment, film could still record all kinds of things in the dimly lit environment very sensitively. However, due to the limited color recognition range of the current digital camera, when it could not fully restore a certain color, it would automatically make up for it with similar surrounding colors. Therefore, the image captured by the digital camera would often be dark in the dimly lit areas, while the image on film would be much clearer. Therefore, Eric felt that it would be appropriate to wait at least another 10 years to promote digital camera and digital projector technology. In fact, the digital movies in his memory did gradually become popular 10 years later. Katzenberg obviously did a lot of preparation work. When he heard what Eric said, he nodded slightly and said, "I actually feel the same way, but we have to wait and see first. If we can really use digital projector equipment, we can save millions of dollars on the copy fees when we release a movie in the future. Especially the dual 3D copy and IMAX copy, the money we can save is even more." But some money can't be saved. Eric sighed with some regret. Speaking of which, after the 2 plans were implemented, at least in the next 10 years, because film would still be used, the copy fee was definitely an important factor that restricted many movies from being converted to 3D and IMAX. After all, Eric planned to use dual 3D projectors, which was equivalent to directly doubling the cost of film copying. However, this actually had an advantage. The high conversion cost could prevent too many inferior 3D movies from appearing. This was exactly what Eric was most worried about in the process of promoting 3D. Eric did not think that he could monopolize the 3D market for too long. Once 3D movies were popularized in advance, there were not many film companies that could keep their integrity for the sake of profits. Texas Instruments obviously attached great importance to this demonstration. The vice president in charge of DLP technology research and development rushed over in person. Although Eric and Katzenberg both knew in their hearts that the two plans in their hands were unlikely to use digital projector equipment for the time being, they still watched the entire demonstration carefully. As Eric imagined, although the resolution of 1280 by 1024 was not bad, in terms of film color, the digital projector prototype developed by Texas Instruments was undoubtedly full of improvements. After watching the demonstration, he discussed some technical details with the vice president of Texas Instruments. Soon, it was time to get off work. Today was already November 20th, close to Thanksgiving. Eric did not return to the Sharp Corner Manor after work. Instead, he rushed to the Chinese Grand Theater in Hollywood with Katzenberg. This was because the first film produced by Disney Animation Studio after the digital transformation, Monster Power Company, would premiere at the Chinese Grand Theater today. Tomorrow was the official release time. Although it was only an animated movie, when Eric and Katzenberg arrived at the premiere, there was already a crowd in front of the Chinese Grand Theater. Katzenberg was personally responsible for Disney Animation Studio. After the summer release of Lion King 2 and Finding Nemo were both considered to be great successes, Katzenberg was both looking forward to and quite nervous about this film from Disney Animation Studio. Many people were also waiting for the results of the brand new Disney Animation Studio with complicated feelings. Chapter 935. Monster Power Company was originally Pixar's project, but Eric sold Disney's hand-drawn animation department. After the brand new Disney Animation Studio was reorganized, the director and screenwriter of Monster Power Company, Peter Doggett, was transferred to Disney Animation Studio. This project also followed and became the first work of Disney Animation Studio after the digital transformation. After Paramount bought the hand-drawn animation studio, they had released two films, Stranger Things in the Wind and The Lion King 2. Although the substantial increase in the salaries of the hand-drawn animators caused the cost of the two animations to increase dramatically, overall, the two 2D animated films were commercially successful. Therefore, as the first work after Disney abandoned the hand-drawn animation department, if the box office of Monster Power Company did not reach a satisfactory level, Eric's decision to sell Disney's hand-drawn animation department was destined to be criticized and mocked again. Perhaps even within Firefly Group, there would be criticism. However, compared to Katzenberg, who was directly in charge of Disney Animation Studio, who was looking forward to it and was anxious, Eric was much more relaxed. Because he liked the wonderful creativity of the animated film very much, Eric had been paying attention to the production progress of the animated film for more than 2 years since the project was started. He even personally added some interesting story details. Therefore, Eric was still very confident in the box office of Monster Power Company. Moreover, the majority of the profit of animated films did not come from the box office. Peripheral products were the majority of the profit of this type of film. Speaking of which, stimulated by the two popular films at the end of last year, Titanic, and this summer's Finding Nemo, as well as the rights to develop peripheral products of the Lion King series were still in the hands of Firefly Group. The sales of peripheral products under Firefly Group had almost doubled compared to last year. In just the first 3 quarters, the sales of peripheral products had reached $2.5 billion. Due to the release of another new 3D animated film, Monster Power Company, at the end of the year, and the fact that Thanksgiving and Christmas were the peak consumer seasons, the company estimated that the sales of peripheral products of the company would very likely exceed $1 billion in the last quarter. This also meant that Firefly Group's 1997 peripheral product sales revenue would reach $3.5 billion. $3.5 billion of sales revenue from peripheral products was almost equivalent to 10% of the entire Firefly Group's annual revenue. In previous years, this figure was usually only around 5%. Moreover, compared to the average net profit rate of about 11% for all of Firefly Group's businesses, the net profit rate of peripheral products was 25%. Therefore, just the peripheral products alone would bring Firefly Group more than $800 million in profit this year. With a little comparison, one could see how shocking Firefly Group's income from peripheral products was. According to publicly available data, in the first 3 quarters of the year, Time Warner Group's revenue from peripheral products was only a mere $370 million. Their profits were even more pitiful. This was because Warner Brothers released Batman and Robin this year. Although it was a box office flop, it more or less boosted the sales of the Batman movie. Even for Viacom, who relied on the Blockbuster retail channel to develop peripheral products, although The Lion King 2 brought good box office revenue to Paramount, because they did not have the rights to develop the peripheral products of the Lion King series, Viacom's peripheral product sales revenue in the first 3 quarters of the year was less than $600 million. It was even less than Firefly Group's peripheral product profits. After attending the premiere of Monster Power Company and showing his face at the following party, Eric left early. When he returned to the shop corner manor, it was already past 10 at night. Entering the living room of the mansion, Eric saw that the guest area on the west side of the glass wall was lit up. Along the way, he saw Jennifer Aniston wrapped in a blanket. She was curled up on the sofa like a kitten sleeping soundly. A white Firefly player and headphones were on the floor next to her. There was also an open copy of Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone next to her hand. Eric carefully picked up the Firefly player and Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone and put them on the coffee table. He did not want to disturb Jennifer Aniston. He quietly walked to the kitchen. He made a pot of coffee and brought it over. He sat down on the sofa next to Jennifer Aniston. Eric poured himself a cup of coffee and began to look through the thick pile of documents on the coffee table in the guest area. After staying in the UK for a month, although everything at Firefly Group was running as usual, Firefly's system was huge. During this time, there were still a lot of things that Eric had to deal with personally. The documents related to the company's administrative affairs were all handled in the office. The pile on the coffee table in front of him was basically movie project information. Compared to this year's series of blockbuster movies, Firefly's movie release plan for next year was much smaller. Other than Michael Bay's The Day After Tomorrow, Firefly did not have any blockbuster movies released next year. Originally, there could have been a sequel to The Matrix, but Eric sold the production rights of The Matrix to Amblin Pictures, which was established by Spielberg and the others. Now, Paramount, which was in charge of distribution, had scheduled The Matrix 2 for next summer. However, there was still no news of The Matrix 3. It was unknown if Amblin and Paramount would be eager to release The Matrix 3 at the end of next year like Time Warner in the original Spacetime. Since Amblin took over the back-to-back filming plan of the Wachowskis, and there was no news of changes to the script, Eric was still not optimistic about the 2 sequels. Although with the popularity of the first movie, after deducting all costs, the 2 sequels would definitely make Amblin and Paramount a lot of money. However, Eric had no regrets. Eric invested the $300 million from selling the rights to the sequel of The Matrix into the Clover Fund to buy technology stocks. Now that the $300 million had doubled, it would not be a problem to double or triple again in the next 2 years. In comparison, the 2 sequels to The Matrix, based on the $1.2 billion global box office in Zhang Ziyan's previous life, plus the income from the videotapes and other post-production profits, would not exceed $600 million in profit for Amblin and Paramount. Eric stopped thinking and looked at the document in his hand. This was a 3D IMAX film called Return to the Cretaceous Period that IMAX planned to produce. This film had already been approved before Firefly acquired IMAX. Since IMAX had changed owners, the decision of whether or not the film would continue to be made fell to Firefly. The film was only planned to be 45 minutes long and had a budget of $15 million. Before this, IMAX basically assisted some museums in producing IMAX documentaries. Although this film was only planned to be 45 minutes long, if it was produced, it would be the first IMAX film. Eric briefly flipped through the script. It was very rough, but after thinking about it, this film was not for storytelling, it was mainly to promote and showcase 3D IMAX technology. After thinking for a while, Eric picked up the pen on the coffee table and wrote a line at the end of the document. He agreed to the filming of this film. There were still 2 years before the 4200 project was implemented. This film could indeed be used to showcase the visual effects of 3D IMAX in advance. At the same time, it would allow the IMAX team to continue to accumulate technology. Eric put the folder aside and continued to read through the other scripts. Due to the long production cycle of special effects blockbusters, it was inevitable that Firefly would experience a temporary downturn in this area. Since Firefly's only major blockbuster next year was The Day After Tomorrow, Eric planned to find a few low to mid-budget films with good box office potential to fill this gap. Teddy Bear had already been approved. Although it was also a special effects film, the production of Teddy Bear was much simpler than Iron Man and The Lord of the Rings. It was expected to be released at the end of next year. In addition, Eric had asked Katzenberg to send people to Japan to search for horror movie scripts, and there had been results. Right now, the scripts for Ring and Ju-on were placed in the pile of documents in front of him. Eric contacted them through email when he was in the United Kingdom and selected them from a large pile of Japanese horror film story outlines. He did not have time to read the detailed scripts. Eric remembered that Ring was released in 1998. He originally thought that Firefly would only be able to obtain the remake rights. But unexpectedly, when Firefly's staff searched for horror film scripts in Japan, although the script for this classic horror film had been completed, it had not yet started shooting. The Japanese naturally did not know that Ring would break the box office record for Japanese horror films. Since the script was fancied by Hollywood giants, they naturally offered it with both hands, so Firefly easily intercepted the script. The other Ju-on was obtained directly from the original screenwriter and director, Chung Shimizu, so there were no twists and turns. After quietly reading the script for a while, Eric looked up and was about to pick up the coffee, but he saw that Jennifer Aniston had woken up. She was lying there motionlessly with a pair of beautiful eyes. Eric smiled and clapped his hands. "Come, hug." Jennifer Aniston heard Eric teasing a kitten and suddenly pouted in dissatisfaction. However, the little girl quickly kicked off the blanket on her body and gracefully floated over. Eric saw Jennifer Aniston pouncing on him. He quickly put the folder on his knees aside and reached out to hug the girl. Eric kissed the sweet face and smiled. "I already told you to go to the premiere with me. Isn't it lonely to stay here alone?" Jennifer Aniston's pointed chin knocked on Eric's shoulder and said softly, "I'm not going. I don't want to be found out that I made up with you again." "Oh, you're like plugging your ears to steal the bell. If you can't hear it, you think others can't hear it either. Last time, you caused such a big commotion. Do you still expect others not to know?" Eric held her waist and teased. Jennifer Aniston nibbled on Eric's shoulder in dissatisfaction. However, he was wearing a jacket and the texture was not very good. She quickly let go of her teeth and said, "Anyway, you're here. Even if they know, they have to pretend not to know." "Well, that's true." Eric was still smiling. His hand on Jennifer Aniston's waist lifted the hem of her sweater. Jennifer Aniston felt the movement of Eric's hand and twisted her waist. After a while, she felt that Eric's movements were getting more and more excessive. She said, "Not here, let's go to the bedroom." "Okay." Eric got up with the girl in his arms and said, "Let's take a shower first." The next day, he was awakened by the sound of knocking on the door. Eric had just opened his eyes and was still in a daze when the bedroom door was pushed open. Drew rushed in with a smirk and jumped directly on the big bed. "Hey, little fat girl, good morning." With that said, the girl did not hesitate to use her cold little hands to grab Jennifer Aniston. The girl, who was also in a daze, immediately woke up when she saw Drew. Like a cat that met its natural enemy, she did not hesitate to grab a pillow to block Drew. She did not show any weakness. "Little B*TCH, do you think I can't beat you? Ha, come and try. Wait, don't run." With that said, the two were already entangled together. Eric helplessly put on his clothes. Seeing that Jennifer Aniston and Drew did not intend to hit the important parts, he knew that they had a sense of propriety. He did not stop them and planned to let the cats fight. He walked to the door and planned to go to the other bathroom to wash up. Seeing the twins guarding the door, he ordered, "Watch them. If they are anxious, pull them away. If Drew needs your help, pretend that you did not hear it." You are not allowed to get involved in this kind of thing in the future." Seeing the twins nodding to show that they understood, Eric left with peace of mind. After a simple wash, he went to exercise for a while before going to the kitchen to prepare breakfast for everyone. While frying eggs, Jennifer Aniston and Drew finally appeared in the dining room outside. Although the two women were still arguing, they did not intend to fight again. "Now that you're done with your exercise, let's eat," Eric said as he lifted his chin towards the bread that was already prepared. "Bring these to the dining room. If you want to eat anything else, go find it in the fridge." The girl came over with a smile and said, "Eric, MGM is preparing a movie that lacks a female lead. It has to be a sweetheart type. It's best if she's over 30 years old." The girl was not to be outdone. "Humph, then you are just right. It would be best if you were hung on a tree in the first 5 minutes like in Scream." Eric knocked on the heads of the two women and said, "Well, today's confrontation ends here. If you want to find a sweetheart over 30 years old, contact Meg Ryan. If you want to act in a horror movie, find me. Well, someone bring me today's newspaper." Chapter 937. Eric arrived in New York in the afternoon. As soon as he got off the plane, he was stopped by Jeff Bezos, who personally came to pick him up. Together, they went to the Morgan Stanley headquarters to attend the Amazon IPO preparation meeting. Jeff Bezos hoped that Amazon could receive some support from Firefly before the IPO to ensure that there would be no accidents during the IPO process. In Eric's mind, Amazon's position in Firefly's system was no less than Yahoo's. Although this IPO would temporarily reduce Firefly's shareholding in Amazon to 27%, in order to obtain more shares of Amazon in the future, Eric would naturally not be stingy with giving more support to Amazon. The meeting lasted until nightfall. After saying goodbye to Jeff Bezos and the others in the parking lot, Eric and Chris got into a black Mercedes-Benz together. The driver drove out of the parking lot. Chris leaned back in his seat and asked, "It's already 7:15. Do you want to eat first or go directly to Risington Avenue?" The 4th Victoria's Secret fashion show was still held at the Arsenal on Risington Avenue. The show started at 8 o'clock at night, but the guests had already begun to enter. "Let's eat first. We can't go there on an empty stomach," Eric said as he told the driver to find a restaurant. Then, he realized the other meaning in Chris's words. "You mean, you don't plan to go to Risington Avenue?" Chris shrugged and said helplessly, "Emily said she had to work until midnight tonight. She told me to go back early to see the kids." "Haha, okay," Eric laughed and stopped teasing Chris. Instead, he asked, "How's the situation in Korea?" The Korean won's closing exchange rate today dropped to 12.55 won. It's 34% lower than the initial exchange rate. 2 days ago, the International Monetary Fund approved $20 billion of aid for Korea. However, as soon as the aid was approved, it was revealed that Korea had less than $10 billion of foreign exchange reserves to resist international hot money. It's impossible for Korea to bet all $20 billion of aid on international hot money. I think the possibility of Korea surviving is very low. When Chris heard this topic, he immediately became spirited. Without any hesitation, he explained the data in his mind. "Of course, I can't be 100% sure. South Korea should be the last stop of the Southeast Asian financial crisis. If it continues to spread, it might affect Europe and the US. The European Union and the federal government have already raised their vigilance and will not allow the hot money to continue. If the European Union and the federal government increase their support for South Korea, South Korean won will still be able to hold on. Now, some funds have already started to settle. Eric, do you think we should stop?" Currently, the Korean won had only fallen by 34%. If they settled now, Firefly's short of $1 billion would only earn about $70 million. If the Korean won fell by more than 70%, Firefly's profits would exceed $400 million. Speculating in foreign exchange was a kind of gamble. The $700 million that was raised by several companies had already been recovered with interest. Although he didn't know if there would be any special accidents in the Korean Won crisis, Eric was still very much inclined to take the risk. Of course we can't stop. All the international hot money is focused on Korean Won. It would be strange if Korea can hold on. Moreover, even if Korean Won is lost, the international hot money will probably only target Russia. The possibility of a counterattack is very low. Chris was banned from entering the Victoria's Secret show by Emily, so Eric wasn't in a hurry. The two slowly ate dinner. Eric and Chris parted ways. When they arrived at the Arsenal on Lexington Avenue, it was already past 8 o'clock. The big show had already started, and there were still many media reporters waiting outside the munitions factory who couldn't get permission to enter. Eric could hear the hot music as soon as he got out of the car. He carefully avoided the large group of reporters outside and went directly backstage. Although the Victoria's Secret show in the past 2 years was no longer the same as the first time, when the sales of the videos alone could earn hundreds of millions of USD. However, due to the soaring sales of the group, Ltd still spared no effort in the Victoria's Secret show. At the end of November, the night temperature in New York was close to 0 degrees. However, the interior of the Arsenal was as warm as spring. The backstage was still busy. Eric greeted a few passing Victoria's Secret angels and staff. He took off his thick trench coat and was about to go to the front desk to find a seat to watch the show live. However, he was stopped by Emily. "Eric, I was looking for you." When Emily saw Eric, she immediately took out a folder from Eva Pakula, who was behind her, and handed it to him. "Here, take a look. We're going to record some senior executive speeches later. You should say a few words." After that, before Eric could react, Emily heard something from the headset and turned around to leave in a hurry. Eric helplessly waved the folder in his hand and asked Eva, who was already Emily's assistant, "What's this?" "Take a look yourself," Eva said and hurriedly walked away with Emily. Eric was about to open the folder to take a look when a few Victoria's Secret angels, who had just changed into their angel costumes, ran over in their high heels with the help of their assistants. Eric quickly stepped aside and looked around. He then walked to the makeup area and sat down casually. Flipping open the folder, it turned out to be a list of the top models' income rankings that was about to be published by Forbes magazine. Forbes had never published a similar list before. It was probably the result of Emily's initiative. This was indeed another way to promote the Victoria's Secret brand. Without much suspense, Cindy Crawford topped the list with an annual income of $20 million. In the past few years, America's Top Model was still at the peak of its ratings. In addition to the 2 seasons of America's Top Model every year, Cindy also served as the producer of America's Top Model in the UK, France, Australia, and other overseas countries. These all brought her a lot of money. In addition, Cindy also received a lot of endorsement fees from various fashion brands. Even if Cindy didn't privately buy technology stocks, her annual income of $20 million was definitely not a small amount. In second place was Linda Evangelista, with an annual income of $15 million. Her main sources of income were from Project Runway and brand endorsements. In third place was Claudia Schiffer, with an annual income of $12 million, which surprised Eric a little. In the past few years, Claudia had successfully transitioned into an actress. Strictly speaking, she could no longer be considered a model. However, this list still included her. Emily probably didn't want the entire list to be filled with Victoria's Secret angels. Eric didn't think this was necessary. The Victoria's Secret Legion was the group with the highest income in the modeling industry. There was no doubt about this. Before Eric created the Victoria's Secret show, the top models in the modeling industry only had an annual income of $1 million. With the rise of the Victoria's Secret Legion, the high exposure of the supermodels also greatly increased their value. Although there was no lack of people in the fashion industry who were jealous of the Victoria's Secret show, no matter how high-end a brand was, in the end, they still wanted their spokespeople to have a higher reputation. The Angel Legion was undoubtedly the group with the highest reputation in the modeling industry. Other than Claudia Schiffer, the next 7 supermodels in the top 10 were all from the Victoria's Secret Legion. 6 of them had an annual income of $10 million. Even the last one had an annual income of $6 million. This level of income was basically impossible before the Victoria's Secret show. Eric was a little confused. What did Emily want him to say by giving him this information? After reading the list in his hand, he was about to turn the page when footsteps came from afar. Eric looked up and saw the baby-faced Chu Si Goff running over. "Good evening, Eric." Eric nodded and looked at Chu Si Goff's pink angel outfit. "This should be the Victoria's Secret pink theme." He asked, "How do you feel?" Chu Si Goff's originally excited little face suddenly became a little bitter. She sat down beside Eric and said, "Hungry?" "Oh, then eat something." Eric pointed to some snacks on the dressing table. This was already the custom of the Victoria's Secret show. Chu Si Goff didn't stand on ceremony. She picked up a box of chocolate beans, but in the end, she held back. She just picked one up and put it in her mouth, narrowing her eyes in satisfaction. Eric couldn't help but laugh. "Don't be like that. You look like you've been abused." Chu Si Goff finished the chocolate and put the box back on the dressing table. "I haven't had a good meal for 2 months. I also have to keep working out. Now I've almost forgotten what chocolate tastes like." Eric handed the folder over and said, "Here, take a look. Will it give you more motivation?" Chu Si Goff took the folder from Eric and glanced at the list. She blinked a few times enviously and said, "So much. I'm afraid I won't be able to earn so much money in my life." "Of course not. If you work hard for a few more years, you'll definitely catch up with them. However, if you want to earn more money, you have to suffer a little." "I know that too. I'm just afraid that I won't be able to persevere," Chu Si Goff said as she returned the folder. She looked more energetic and said, "I heard that you were here, so I came over to say hello. It's my turn later. Eric, will you be watching from the front?" Eric shook his head and said, "I prefer to watch from the backstage. It would be better if I could go to the dressing room." "Oh, then go ahead. No one will dare to stop you," Chu Si Goff said. She leaned forward and kissed Eric politely on the cheek. She got up and said, "I'll go then. Eric, you'll definitely be at the party later, right?" "Of course. We'll dance together." Then it's settled. Chu Si Goff just ran off to wait for the stage. However, before Eric could turn his attention back to the folder in his hand, a theme ended. Cindy, Linda, and a few others ran over to say hello. "Hey, Daddy. Why are you hiding here alone?" Linda walked over, and her first sentence almost made Eric fall off his chair. Although the girl said the word, "Daddy," her tone was full of ridicule. Seeing Eric's helpless expression, Cindy and the others laughed heartlessly. For a moment, Eric was surrounded by flowers. Many people's eyes were attracted to them. The invited reporters even raised their cameras. Eric raised the folder and wanted to smack Linda's head, but seeing that she was subconsciously protecting her hairstyle, he didn't smack her. He just waved the folder and said, "I'm trying to see if the money you guys earn in a year is more than what I earn in a day. Unfortunately, none of you are. You guys are so disappointing." "Ah." Linda suspiciously snatched the folder from Eric's hand. Cindy and the others also curiously came over. "Wow, Cindy actually earned 20 million. I was wondering why Emily asked me about this a few days ago." "So it was because of the rankings. Paulina, your income should be considered low. I remember that you signed an endorsement contract with Maybelline last month. It should be more than $6 million. Wow, Linda is such a lazy person. She actually earned 15 million. You're lazy." A group of beauties surrounded Linda and commented excitedly or disappointedly. Linda remembered Eric's words just now. She looked up and asked, "Eric, just now, how much did you say you earned in a day?" Paulina Pliskova, who looked like Audrey Hepburn, interrupted, "Linda, you shouldn't have asked him this question. It must be very frustrating." Helena Christensen, who didn't manage to get a seat and could only stand next to Eric, also said, Yes, I read a magazine last time. It said that Eric's net worth is now more than 100 billion US dollars. Oh my God, 100 billion US dollars. If I had that much money, I probably wouldn't even know how to spend it. Don't worry, if you really have that much money, we can all help you spend it. Stephanie Seymour on the other side finished speaking and looked over with a smile. She said, Eric, we can also help you spend it. Eric immediately shook his head and pretended to be a miser. He said, I definitely won't care about my married daughter. I don't have a single cent. Stephanie Seymour had just married her rich boyfriend 2 years ago. Hearing Eric's words, everyone laughed again. Just as they were laughing, Emily hurried over and glared at Eric fiercely. Then, she said to Linda and the other women, Ladies, don't forget what we're doing. Hurry up and change your clothes or touch up your makeup. The women were obviously a little afraid of Emily. Hearing this, they all got up and left. After chasing away the group of beauties, Emily still didn't let Eric go. She said, Everyone is so busy that they're flying. You're still here causing trouble. If something goes wrong, it'll be big trouble. Eric shrugged helplessly. Can I say that I'm innocent? No. Emily shook her head and said, Have you read the document just now? Eric nodded. Almost. What do you want me to say? Chapter 938. It's an interview on the influence of the Victoria's Secret Angels, Emily said. When it's broadcasted on TV, I plan to include an interview with the executives and the Victoria's Secret Angels themselves. Eric understood. She wanted to hype up the Victoria's Secret Angels' annual income so that Victoria's Secret could attract more attention. He pointed at Edward Razek, who had been promoted to Victoria's Secret's chief marketing officer, and said with a smile, Well, you guys can just say a few words. Do you think it's appropriate for me to praise the Victoria's Secret Angel for making so much money this year? I think the audience will be more likely to think, how much money did Eric Williams earn this year? Emily rolled her eyes and said, Don't worry, I won't let them think that way. You're the founder of the Victoria's Secret fashion show. You have the most right to speak on this topic. Think about what to say. I'll call the cameraman. Is there a need to rush? Who knows where you'll run off to in the next few days, Emily said before hurrying off again. Eric was just thinking about what to say when Emily walked over with a cameraman. She motioned for Eric to go to a quieter office. They sat down on the sofa in the office and waited for the cameraman to turn on the camera. Emily saw that Eric still didn't seem to be prepared to say anything. She knew that this topic was a little sudden, so she took the initiative to guide him. Then, tell me, what's the root cause of the increase in the income of the Victoria's Secret Angels? Emily asked this in hopes that Eric would change the topic to Victoria's Secret support for the Angel supermodels. She only wanted Eric to say something related and then choose a few suitable words to insert into the interview. However, Eric didn't understand Emily's intention this time. He thought for a while and said, I think the root cause is the actual manifestation of the eyeball economy. Eyeball economy? Emily asked doubtfully. Sensing Emily's confusion, Eric realized that the eyeball economy might be a term that started to become popular after the rise of the Internet. He explained, the eyeball economy is an economic activity that gains economic benefits by attracting the public's attention. Traditionally, the viewership ratings of television stations or the circulation of newspapers needed to attract enough attention in order to reach a certain level. The same is true for the Victoria's Secret Angels. There are tens of thousands of girls in the modeling profession all over the world, but only this group attracts most of the public's attention. Emily was clearly led astray by Eric as she retorted, It's just that their income will increase with more attention. That doesn't make sense. Of course, in many news events, some ordinary people will suddenly receive a lot of attention, but this doesn't bring them any actual economic benefits. Eric agreed and said, There's also the problem of cashing in. The Victoria's Secret Angels gain more attention through the Victoria's Secret fashion show. At the same time, they have a complete management team behind them to help them cash in on this attention. Those fashion brands are willing to pay a higher price than before in order to increase their popularity. They hire supermodels from the Victoria's Secret Angels to be their brand ambassadors. In the end, their income is much higher than before. I remember Linda saying that she won't get out of bed without $10,000 a day. But now, if you want to invite her to a show, even $100,000 might not be enough. This is because she has gathered more eyeballs than before. Emily thought for a while and nodded. That's true. I didn't expect you to have so many interesting theories in your mind. The eyeball economy seems to be very compatible with the current internet industry. Of course, whether it's a portal or e-commerce, it needs to receive enough attention to be successful. If you pay attention to Amazon's hunger marketing in the first half of the year, you will understand this point more deeply. Wall Street's valuation of Amazon was only $2 billion in the first half of the year, but now it's $5 billion. It can be said that the eyeball economy produced by hunger marketing brought $5 billion of income to Amazon. If Yahoo wants to maintain its current rapid development, its future marketing strategy also needs to firmly grasp the concept of the eyeball economy. I remember that I wrote a memo to the higher-ups of Yahoo about this. If you're interested, you can find it and take a look. Emily nodded. She only realized the current situation when she saw the interested look on the cameraman's face. She unreasonably glared at Eric and said, "You changed the topic again. We're talking about the Victoria's Secret Angels." The show was still going on outside. Emily didn't want to be absent if something unexpected happened. Therefore, she didn't ask any ambiguous questions. She directly asked Eric to put in a few good words for the Angel Corps before ending the recording. Although it was already the fourth show, whether it was the higher-ups of LTD or the Angel supermodels participating in the show, they were still trembling with fear every time they walked the show. Emily and the other higher-ups were worried that something unexpected would happen during the show, while the Angel supermodels were worried about whether they would fall on the runway. Back then, Diane Kruger relied on a shoe thrown on the stage to benefit from a disaster and staged a Cinderella incident. She became the most popular supermodel in the first Victoria's Secret fashion show. However, in the past few years, no supermodel dared to deliberately do this. All the Victoria's Secret Angels only hoped that they could successfully complete their runway show. Fortunately, after a tense and hectic 60 minutes, the show finally came to a successful end. After the curtain call, the guests at the front desk began to leave one after another. This time, the 43 Victoria's Secret Angels gathered backstage again. After the big photo shoot for publicity, everyone would rush to the nearby Gramercy Park Hotel to participate in the afterparty. Eric ignored the noise of a group of excited girls taking photos not far away. He was sitting not far away and chatting with Elton John, who was the guest singer of the show, trying to persuade the legendary British singer to join the Yahoo Music Store. However, Cindy and Linda ran over from the photo-taking crowd and pulled Eric to participate in the photo shoot. Eric looked at their high-heeled boots that were above their knees and shook his head firmly. He smiled and said, "No, I'm not going to stand with you girls for a photo shoot. It will affect my tall and heroic image." The average height of the Victoria's Secret Angels was close to 1.8 meters, not to mention that they were all wearing all kinds of high heels. Although Eric wasn't short, standing in the middle of this group of girls would definitely be very incongruous. Linda pulled Eric's hand unhappily and said, "Then you can sit down. We'll get you a stool." Eric deliberately patted the two-seater sofa that he and Elton John were sitting on and said, "You move this over and I'll take the photo." "Ha, you think we can't move it over?" Cindy said and shouted at the crowd not far away. After successfully completing the show, the group of girls who were in a state of excitement rushed up without hesitation. Elton John quickly got up and dodged with a smile. Eric also stood up and said, Okay, no need to move it. I'll go over." The Victoria's Secret Angels, who were already a little crazy, ignored Eric. Amidst the crowd's laughter, 7 or 8 girls easily lifted the two-seater sofa and walked to the photo shoot area. Linda watched her sisters put the sofa in front of the photo wall and glanced at Eric proudly. She pulled him over and pressed him in the middle of the sofa. She didn't leave and sat down next to Eric. With Linda taking the lead, the other angels also swarmed forward. Cindy easily grabbed the seat on Eric's right, and the armrests on both sides of the sofa were quickly occupied as well. Eric also felt a gust of fragrant wind behind him, and he could feel a few pairs of small hands touching him. He didn't know if it was intentional or not. Russell James, the photographer of Victoria's Secret, seemed to think that the scene wasn't lively enough. He waved his hand and said, "Mr. Williams, can you cross your legs? Also, who can come to the front?" Since he had been pulled over, Eric could only cooperate and cross his legs. However, in his heart, he thought that this photo must not be leaked. Otherwise, he would definitely be surrounded by countless male creatures. Because she was a newcomer, Chu Si-goff, who was squeezed out of the crowd, immediately left her seat and walked to the front of the sofa when she heard Russell James's words. As a top model, posing was almost instinctive. Chu Si-goff naturally leaned against Eric's legs and sat down. She slightly curled her long legs and gently put an arm on Eric's knee. The other position was occupied by Helena Christensen. She was still wearing the sexy angel costume and her soft body was gently pressed against Eric's legs. Russell James directed a few more supermodels to pose. 43 beauties surrounded Eric tightly. Only then did he raise his camera and shout, "Okay, 3, 2, 1. Yeah." In the banquet hall of the Gracie Garden Hotel, all the angel supermodels had changed into their best clothes. Eric had just finished a dance with Cindy and came out of the dance floor when he was stopped by Stephanie Seymour, who was holding her husband, Peter Grant's arm. After a few simple greetings, Stephanie Seymour gradually got to the point and asked, "Eric, I heard that MGM is producing a TV series that you personally conceived for the newly acquired Bravo channel. Do you think I can give it a try?" The TV series that Stephanie Seymour was talking about was naturally Desperate Housewives. At present, the series had already begun casting and was scheduled to air in the spring of next year. Eric knew that this was the last time that Stephanie Seymour would participate in the Victoria's Secret runway. Although she was not yet 30, her husband, the publishing tycoon Peter Grant, obviously didn't want his beautiful wife to appear on the Victoria's Secret runway anymore. He had specifically told Emily about this in private. Eric wouldn't expose these little tricks. After all, if it were him, he would probably do the same. Glancing at Peter Grant, who maintained a smile but clearly had some helplessness on his face, Eric showed a regretful expression and shook his head. "I'm sorry, Stephanie. Of the 4 female leads in the plan, 3 of them are set to be around 40 years old. Although the last one is the same age as you, I hope that this character can be Latina. You know, we have to set some minority characters." Speaking of which, Stephanie Seymour seemed to be only 29 years old this year. Even her profession was very much in line with the setting of the retired supermodel character played by Eva Longoria in the original Desperate Housewives. If it wasn't for political correctness, Stephanie Seymour could really give it a try. As for what Peter Grant thought, Eric naturally didn't care. However, although the Wisteria neighborhood in the script was obviously a wealthy middle-class white community, if ABC really set all 4 female leads as white people, and if the series became popular in the future, it would inevitably be attacked by people with ulterior motives. Stuffing in a Latina would be a way to shut some people's mouths. Stephanie Seymour wasn't discouraged. As if she still wanted to say something, Peter Grant, who was standing next to her, finally couldn't help but say, "Baby, you'd better not make things difficult for Eric. I think it's best for you to focus on your child for the next few years." Because of her age, Stephanie Seymour, who realized that she was about to retire, couldn't wait to marry Peter Grant a few years ago. However, the consecutive Victoria's Secret shows unexpectedly gave her career a second chance. As an ambitious woman, she now had some regrets in her heart. She would be leaving Victoria's Secret next year. She knew that if she didn't do something, in less than 2 years, her newly revitalized career would fall into silence again. That was why she hoped to get a chance to act in a TV series from Eric. Because of the theme, several female leads of City on Fire were now doing well in the fashion industry. Stephanie Seymour didn't doubt that if she could get a role in Desperate Housewives, which was personally conceived by Eric, her fame could be maintained for a long time. However, after hearing her husband say that, Stephanie Seymour couldn't embarrass him in front of Eric and Cindy. She could only nod obediently and chat with Eric for a while before reluctantly walking away with Peter Grant. Cindy watched the 2 of them walk away and then smiled with some schadenfreude. "See, Stephanie must be regretting it now. Marriage is not only the grave of love, but also the grave of career. Eric smiled and said, "If it weren't for Victoria's Secret, I think you would be in the grave by now, right? Yeah, I would probably, find a man who's not as good as me, but not too far behind me. That way, I could live a free life, unlike Stephanie, who's bound by her husband's family background." Eric saw Emily not far away. He walked over with Cindy and asked, "What about now?" "Now?" Cindy's eyes were a little confused. She shook her head and said, "Now, it's not easy to find the kind of man I originally hoped for. If he's too far behind me, I'll definitely not be able to live. If he's similar to me or a little better than me, they'll definitely think that I'm too strong, and it won't be good for them. Then you might as well find a woman. I think Linda is good. Then you can adopt a child." Eric casually joked. He didn't notice the change in Cindy's expression. He walked in front of Emily and said, "That photo, don't send it out. I don't want people to throw eggs at me because of jealousy." Emily rolled her eyes at Eric and said, "I thought you would be very proud." "What's there to be proud of? I can only look at it but not eat it." Emily glanced at Cindy and said, "I think it's not that you can't eat it, but that you can't eat it, right? That's 43 of them." Eric was immediately dissatisfied. Are you looking down on me? Okay, I'm not going to talk nonsense with you. Of course, I won't let anyone send that photo out." "Don't worry," Emily said. She then greeted Cindy, who was still deep in thought, and walked towards a guest not far away with a smile. Chapter 939. After a few years of operation, the Victoria's Secret show had completely confirmed its status as the Super Bowl of the fashion industry. On the second day of the show, countless media outlets began to report on it spontaneously, raising the expectation of the TV broadcast a week later to the highest level. A newspaper owned by the Forbes Corporation also released the 1997 Supermodel Income List in a timely manner a few days later. This Supermodel Income List, which was comparable to the annual income list of Hollywood actresses, naturally caused several heated discussions and even caused the stock price of LTD to rise. After the Victoria's Secret show, Eric focused his attention on Amazon, which was about to be listed. On December 1st, Amazon officially entered the Nasdaq market. The 30 million shares, which were issued at $15, finally opened at $20.55, an increase of 37%. Until the end of the day, Amazon's stock price remained high at $13, which made Amazon's market value reach $65 billion on the day of its listing. The 90 million shares of Amazon held by Firefly also increased to more than $1.8 billion on the day of Amazon's IPO. This was more than 6 times the amount that Firefly had invested in Amazon. According to Amazon's stock price on the day of its listing, the company's price-to-earnings ratio was more than 60 times. Although the Nasdaq market bubble in recent years had caused the price-to-earnings ratio to be generally high, the price-to-earnings ratio of Amazon's stock price was still twice the market average. This inevitably caused the media to worry about the stock market bubble again. Eric remembered that when the Nasdaq technology stocks were at their craziest, some companies' price-to-earnings ratios were even more than 1,000 times. Amazon's price-to-earnings ratio of more than 60 times was just the beginning. The next 2 years would be the craziest time of the Nasdaq market. In December, Thanksgiving was over. Although there were still 3 weeks before Christmas, the festive atmosphere in America was even more intense. After Eric attended Amazon's IPO, he did not immediately rush to Long Island to spend Christmas with his women and children. Instead, he quickly flew back to Los Angeles and devoted himself to the busy work at the end of the year. While Eric was in New York, MGM's Amazing Night at the Museum 2 was released on November 28. The box office for the first 3 days was $17 million, and the box office for the first 7 days was only $8 million, which was lower than MGM's expectations of $85 to $90 million for the first week. As a special effects blockbuster whose production cost had soared to $120 million, the film's total box office in North America would probably stop between $150 million and $200 million, far lower than the first film's $250 million box office in North America. The corresponding overseas box office would probably not be too ideal. Compared to Amazing Night at the Museum 2, Monster Power Company's box office performance was very good. After the box office of $76.59 million in the first week, the box office of Monster Power Company only dropped by a very small 24% in the second week. It collected another $57.02 million, and the total box office for the 2 weeks had reached $133 million. Based on the box office and word of mouth of Monster Power Company, the 3D animated movies box office in North America might exceed $250 million. As the first production of the brand new Disney animation studio, the production cost of this movie was relatively low. Therefore, Firefly Group would reap huge profits in North America alone. MGM's headquarters in Century City. Eric flipped through the audition materials for Desperate Housewives and chatted with Amy Pascal about the box office of Night at the Museum 2. The production cost of the first installment of Night at the Museum was only $70 million, and the global box office was close to $600 million. The production cost of the sequel had soared to $120 million, and the global box office was expected to only reach $400 million. Even so, MGM's profits were still very secure, but the production of the third sequel needed to be done carefully. So, Amy, the box office for the first week was $10 million lower than expected, and the word of mouth was not as good as the first one. What do you think the problem is? Amy Pascal glanced at Eric, who was casually flipping through the actor materials. She did not know if Eric had already made his own judgment, but she still answered seriously, I think this should be because the series of Night at the Museum is not a traditional special effects blockbuster. It's more of a comedy. The box office of comedy movie sequels has always been very unstable, because it's difficult to judge the audience's taste for comedy sequels. Sometimes, a comedy can have many sequels and still be very popular. Some people only make the second movie and the audience will be tired of it. Eric nodded. The protagonist of Night at the Museum was Ben Stiller. At the moment, the reputation of Hollywood's troublemakers had not yet risen, but a group of comedy stars led by Ben Stiller had begun to gather. It was not an exaggeration to say that Night at the Museum was a troublemaker comedy. Troublemaker comedies generally had the characteristic of lacking sequels. After thinking for a moment, Eric said, as for the third movie, don't start it for the next 2 years. Spend more time on polishing the script. Also, Ben Stiller's salary can't be increased any more. Amy Pascal nodded. As the two were chatting, the office door was knocked a few times. Amy Pascal's assistant pushed the door open and said, Mr. Williams, Ms. Pascal, it's time for the audition. Eric and Amy Pascal heard this and packed up the materials in front of them and walked to the audition room. After the preliminary work at MGM, the 4 female leads of Desperate Housewives were basically confirmed. Other than Terry Hatcher, who played Susan, Eric had chosen the other 3 housewives. This time, he just wanted to see the results of the auditions in person. Terry Hatcher also had a cameo role in Casino Royale. Although the global success of Casino Royale had given Terry Hatcher some fame, she was already 33 years old this year. She had passed the golden age of an actress, so it was impossible for her to have much development as a movie actress. Besides, Desperate Housewives was an idea that Eric had personally conceived. When MGM sent out an invitation, Terry Hatcher immediately accepted the role. However, Eric had other considerations when he chose Terry Hatcher to play Susan. In the past, after Desperate Housewives became popular, the 4 housewives originally planned to follow the example of the 6 people of Friends and join forces to ask ABC for $1 million per episode. However, during the negotiation process, Terry Hatcher left the other 3 actresses and signed a contract with ABC privately. Naturally, the alliance to put pressure on ABC collapsed. Eric did not know the details, but the disagreements within the Desperate Housewives crew were well known. In fact, Terry Hatcher's unsociability ensured that the four housewives of Desperate Housewives would not unite this time. When he walked into the audition room, the four actresses who were already waiting in the room stood up. Terry Hatcher, who was more familiar with Eric, walked over first and hugged Eric warmly. When Eric hugged Terry Hatcher, he felt the woman's fingers gently stroke his back. He just smiled. Although he did not remember much about her, he knew that she was definitely a difficult woman. Eric did not want to get into trouble. After letting go of Terry Hatcher, Eric turned to the other three actresses. Among the remaining three actresses, Eric only knew one of them, Elizabeth Perkins. He did not have any impression of the other two actresses. They were completely selected by the MGM television department. Elizabeth Perkins was also an actress that Eric had specially chosen. Eric had seen Elizabeth Perkins' performance in Single Toxic Moms, and felt that Elizabeth Perkins was the most suitable actress to play the perfectionist OCD Brie Van Dijk in Desperate Housewives. Elizabeth Perkins had an air of elegance that was similar to that of a good wife and mother. Since the roles had basically been finalized, Eric had also watched the audition tapes of several actresses in advance, and there was nothing he was dissatisfied with. Therefore, the audition was more like a relaxed atmosphere of reading the script. However, Eric was probably the only one who had this kind of mentality. The four actresses were all cautious. Since it was Desperate Housewives, Eric deliberately set the ages of the housewives to be younger so that they would not have to take Botox desperately to maintain their appearance like before. However, other than the 27-year-old Latina actress named Vanita Crown, the other three actresses were all over 30 years old. The current TV series was almost the last chance for them to make a comeback in their acting careers. This relaxed audition only lasted for an hour and a half. Eric had to rush to Firefly Studios to attend a year-end meeting. He simply watched a few performances and chatted with the actresses about his views on the TV series before leaving in a hurry. However, before leaving, Eric handed a card to Amy's assistant and asked her to pass it to Elizabeth Perkins. During the exchange, Eric suddenly had a feeling for Elizabeth Perkins, a mature woman with a beautiful face and temperament, so he did not hesitate to make a move. After laying a huge foundation in Hollywood, Eric naturally regarded this territory as his hunting ground. He never intended to let go of the prey that he was interested in. After passing the audition, Elizabeth Perkins finally breathed a sigh of relief. She originally thought that Eric Williams would inevitably be a little arrogant since he was young. However, throughout the audition process, the young Hollywood mogul gave her a very gentle feeling. However, as she was about to leave, Amy Pascal's assistant stopped her, handed over a card, and whispered, "Ms. Perkins, this is from Mr. Williams." Elizabeth Perkins was stunned as she noticed the jealous and disdainful look in the eyes of Terry Hatcher, who was obviously pretending to look for something in her handbag. Elizabeth Perkins hurriedly nodded at the assistant before stuffing the card into her coat pocket and hurrying out. Elizabeth Perkins didn't take out the card until she came to the parking lot and sat in the car. Although she had expected it, she was still at a loss when she saw an invitation to dinner and a string of phone numbers on the card. She was not a newbie who entered Hollywood for the first time. Naturally, she knew what this invitation meant. She drove away from the MGM headquarters and aimlessly turned to Rodeo Avenue in Beverly Hills. She stopped the car unconsciously and found that there was a women's clothing store on the side of the road. After hesitating for a while, Elizabeth Perkins got out of the car and went into the women's clothing store to pick out a new set of clothes. She was deceiving herself, thinking that this was a reward for getting the role. After shopping for clothes, she suddenly gave up on herself and went to buy a pair of Manolo high heels. This brand of high heels had become even more popular after the broadcast of Want City. In the past, she couldn't bear to buy them. Although the movie Flying Across the Future with Tom Hanks many years ago made her popular for a period of time, that was 10 years ago. After that, she didn't receive any influential movies. Now, she could only act in TV dramas. She wandered through the streets of Los Angeles until night fell. She watched the lights on both sides of the road gradually start to turn on. She stopped at a roadside phone booth and dialed the number on the card. It was not Eric Williams who answered the phone. He just asked for her location and then said that he would send a car to pick her up. Elizabeth Perkins hung up the phone and wanted to get into the car. After thinking about it, she stood by the roadside and waited. After waiting for about 20 minutes, a black car stopped by the roadside. The driver got out of the car and opened the door to look at her. Elizabeth Perkins then realized that the car was here to pick her up. After getting into the car, she found that Eric was also sitting in the back. Eric watched Elizabeth Perkins sit down beside him and said with a smile, "I thought you wouldn't call me." Elizabeth Perkins was still a little unwilling. She asked with a hint of indifference, "If I didn't call you, would I not have gotten the role?" Eric shrugged and said in a somewhat hateful tone, "Maybe. You have to know that a big shot like me usually can't stand being rejected." Elizabeth Perkins could sense that Eric was joking. She could not help but add, "And you don't know how to say nice things to make a woman happy." When Eric heard that, he turned his head and looked at the woman next to him carefully. Only then did he realize that she had changed into a new set of clothes. He nodded and praised, "You look very beautiful tonight." Elizabeth Perkins subconsciously raised her chin, "And I'm 10 years older than you." Elizabeth Perkins immediately regretted blurting out this sentence without thinking. She did not think that a person like Eric would endure her slightly provocative words again and again. Eric was not angry at all. Instead, he smiled even more hatefully. "It seems that the whole Hollywood knows that I like more mature women." Elizabeth Perkins opened her mouth, but this time she held back and did not say anything. She just rolled her eyes at Eric. Eric looked at the woman's appearance and thought of something. He asked, "I suddenly remembered another thing. Are you married?" Elizabeth Perkins turned her head. "Do you still care about this?" "Of course." Eric nodded and said, "I actually have a little principle. If you are married, I will send you back now." Elizabeth Perkins stared at Eric for a few seconds. Seeing his serious face, she shook her head and said, "I was married once. It was a long time ago." "Oh, it seems that there is a story. Maybe we can talk later." Elizabeth Perkins felt that Eric's tone was hateful again, but she just rolled her eyes again. She had never heard of the saying that life was like that: if you could not resist, you could enjoy it. However, she also found that Eric was actually a guy who was very good at pleasing and even accommodating women. After dinner, she felt that tonight's experience was actually not bad. So many things became natural. Chapter 940. In the Northern Hemisphere in December, snow had already begun to fall in most areas, but Los Angeles was still as warm as spring. It was already past 9 o'clock in the morning at the Pointy Corner Manor. In the circular master bedroom of the Seashell Villa, all the curtains were pulled open, and the bright morning sun poured in from all directions. Elizabeth Perkins lay lazily on the big bed, not minding that the blanket on her body was completely pulled open by the man next to her. She meekly felt a slightly rough hand moving up and down her smooth back. Thinking back to last night and the various situations just now, although she was a little embarrassed, she couldn't help but feel proud that her mature body could attract the young man next to her. Eric reclined on the side with his hand on his cheek, gently caressing the woman's body. He was in a daze, wondering if he really had some kind of plot. The sudden ringing of the phone disturbed the silence in the bedroom. Elizabeth Perkins, who was looking for birds flying in the blue sky outside the window, turned her head curiously, only to see Eric's strange expression after picking up the phone, as if he had seen a ghost. She was about to ask something, but Eric had already reached out to cover her mouth. "Jenny, I'm upstairs. I just finished exercising and am changing. Can you help me prepare breakfast first?" Kiss. After hanging up the phone, Eric's expression still didn't relax. It had been a few years, but the girl's talent didn't show any signs of failing at all. It had only been a few days, and she had started to use her big move again. Somewhat glad that the villa was big enough, Eric didn't hesitate to pick up his clothes and start to put them on. Elizabeth Perkins looked at Eric's flustered appearance and chuckled. She also heard Eric say the word "Jenny" just now, and her lazy and hoarse voice had a hint of schadenfreude. "Your girlfriend." Eric looked at the woman who was still lying lazily on the big bed as if she was enjoying the sun. He nodded, put on a t-shirt, and quickly picked up all of Elizabeth Perkins' clothes and shoes, and threw them on the bed. Then he rolled up the bed sheet and wrapped the woman in it, picked her up, and walked to the bathroom. Elizabeth Perkins did not resist Eric's actions. She only grabbed her high heels and held them outside. She was still giggling as she asked, "Eric, if she finds out, will I be strangled to death?" "You won't, but I will." Eric joked as he pushed open the bathroom door and placed the woman in the bathtub. "I'm sorry, Liz. You have to hide here for a while. I'll call you when I leave with Jenny." Elizabeth Perkins changed her position and leaned comfortably in the large bathtub. Looking at Eric, who was about to leave, she said, "I don't mind, but don't you know that a woman's nose is very sharp?" Eric was stunned for a moment and immediately understood. He had been entangled with Elizabeth Perkins the entire night and had not showered after the morning passion. It would be strange if Jennifer Aniston did not smell the scent of another woman on him. Thinking of this, Eric searched on the bathroom sink but could not find any men's perfume. He did not have the habit of wearing men's perfume. He only remembered that the girl had bought him a bottle before, but he did not know where she had thrown it. Since he could not find any perfume, Eric had to take off his clothes and stood under the shower to take a shower. Because it was Saturday, Eric was able to relax and have some fun. He did not expect to be almost caught by the girl again. After taking a shower, Eric checked the other traces in the bedroom. He went to the study and picked up a laptop before walking downstairs. When he came to the kitchen, he kissed Jennifer Aniston, who was preparing breakfast. After making sure that the girl did not smell anything from him, Eric was relieved. He put the laptop on the dining table and planned to check today's work email. The IBM laptop in front of him had finally achieved wireless Wi-Fi connectivity. This was the effect of the wireless router sample that Firefly Electronics' R&D department had just sent over last week. However, the laptop did not have a Wi-Fi connectivity module yet, so it could only be equipped with an external signal receiver. Today was December 13th, a week before Christmas. Therefore, there were no new blockbuster movies on air. Firefly's Monster Power Company and MGM's Amazing Night at the Museum 2 were still leading the box office. Monster Power Company, which had been released for 3 weeks, had accumulated a box office of $168 million. The results were gratifying. Amazing Night at the Museum 2, on the other hand, had a drop of 58% in the box office in the second week. The accumulated box office had just broken through $100 million and reached $112 million. After seeing the results of Amazing Night at the Museum 2, Eric could not help but worry about Rush Hour 2, which was going to be released next week. This was an action comedy movie starring Jack Cheng and Chris Tucker. The production cost of the first movie was $33 million and the global box office was close to $250 million. Although Eric had asked New Line to sign a contract with the 2 male leads from the beginning, because the first movie was a huge success, the 2 lead actors' salaries for the sequel were increased to $15 million. Therefore, the 2 lead actors received $30 million in salary this time. The production cost of other aspects also increased, causing the total production cost of Rush Hour 2 to reach $70 million. Although the production cost of movies in the past 2 years had repeatedly set records, a production cost of $70 million was still considered a big-budget movie. Eric had watched the original Rush Hour trilogy, but he did not pay attention to the production cost and box office of the 3 movies. He also did not know how much the $70 million production cost would bring to Firefly. Also, the movie's schedule was not very optimistic. Other than Jurassic Park 3, which was scheduled to be released a week after Rush Hour 2, there was also the sci-fi movie Starship Troopers, produced by Sony Pictures. Eric remembered that this sci-fi movie had been criticized for having too many political metaphors. However, special effects movies were still very popular in recent years. Obviously, the average audience would not pay too much attention to political issues. After the failure of Godzilla during the summer, Sony Pictures still invested $40 million in this movie, which cost nearly $110 million to produce. Starship Troopers would undoubtedly be the biggest threat to Rush Hour 2. During the summer, there were Prison in the Sky, Finding Nemo, Casino Royale, Jedi Cop 2, At the end of the year, there were Monster Power Company, Amazing Night at the Museum 2, Rush Hour 2, Jurassic Park 3. Even if he only counted the Firefly movies, Eric found that the North American movie schedule was getting more and more crowded. In his memory, in the future, there would be big-budget movies released in May, June, July, August, and even September. This could be said that the summer schedule was extended from June and July to 5 months. There would also be blockbusters released at Easter and the beginning of November. Perhaps it was time to extend the hot movie schedule or develop a new schedule. Otherwise, the North American movie schedule would only cause more and more internal friction. Eric thought about these things in his mind and unknowingly opened another email in his mailbox. Although Jennifer Aniston had already eaten breakfast, she still made 2 servings and planned to eat with Eric. She placed the breakfast on the table and walked behind Eric. She curiously glanced at the laptop screen and softly exclaimed. She then put her arms around Eric's neck and moved closer to him. "What's wrong?" Eric kissed the girl's cheek and asked with a smile. He then looked at the laptop screen. This email turned out to be the global box office statistics for Casino Royale. It was already the end of the year and the global release of Casino Royale was basically over. Although there were still some small countries that had not released the movie, it would not have much of an impact on the total box office. The future increase would at most be a few million USD. Jennifer Aniston pointed at the eye-catching box office number on the screen and said, 1.35 billion US. Is this the global box office of Casino Royale? Eric quickly browsed through the email. The North American box office of Casino Royale was set at 372 million US. The overseas box office was 763 million US. The global box office was 1.35 billion US. According to the 55% split in North America and 35% overseas, MGM's share of the box office of Casino Royale was as high as 471 million US. The total investment for the production and distribution of Casino Royale was 160 million US. In other words, MGM would have a net profit of 310 million US. Compared to Godzilla and Batman and Robin during the summer, the performance of Casino Royale was much more outstanding. 1.35 billion US. I didn't expect it. Eric nodded with a smile and said, but it still can't compare to Jim's Titanic. Jennifer Aniston kissed Eric on the cheek and said, the box office of all your movies combined is definitely higher than his. Eric heard this and couldn't help but think of this question. Since his debut in 1988, he didn't know the cumulative box office of the movies he participated in. However, if only the 3 recent movies, Tornado, Jurassic Park, and Casino Royale were counted, it was probably similar to Cameron's cumulative box office. Plus the previous movies such as Home Alone and Pretty Woman, it was not a problem to surpass Cameron's. After reading this email, Eric temporarily closed the browser, picked up the tableware, and looked at Jennifer Aniston, who was sitting next to him, and said, "It's Christmas next week, do you want to go to New York with me?" Although she never took the initiative to mention it, Jennifer Aniston was still inexplicably curious about Eric's 2 children. She thought for a while and asked, "Will Drew go?" Eric nodded and said, "She used to go. It's more lively when everyone spends Christmas together. I called the day before yesterday, and Vicky said that it might snow in New York in a few days, so it will be more Christmas." The girl was obviously a little tempted, but she hesitated for a while and shook her head. "I'm not going. You just have to spend Thanksgiving with me in the future." "Okay then." Eric didn't force her. He changed the topic and said, "Where do you plan to go after breakfast?" "I don't plan to go during the day, but I have a party with Matthew tonight. Come with me." The Matthew that Aniston was talking about was probably Matthew Perry. Although he hadn't acted in Friends back then, Matthew Perry had been doing well in the film industry in the past few years. However, he wasn't as popular as when he was in Home Alone. "Okay, then let's go buy some clothes during the day." Eric naturally wouldn't refuse Jennifer Aniston's small request. After eating a few mouthfuls of breakfast, he suddenly thought of something and said, "Speaking of Matthew, I happen to have a comedy that has been looking for a male lead. Maybe I can let him try. Well, of course, the scale of this comedy may be a bit too big. I don't know if he will be willing. Eric's main work during this period was several new films around the Firefly genre, and Teddy Bear was one of them. The original Mark Wahlberg had just debuted, so it was naturally not suitable. During this period of time, the roles that the casting department provided for him were also very difficult to satisfy. Now that he thought about it, Matthew Perry, who looked a bit haggard but also had the temperament of a comedian, was perfect for the role. In this regard, Mark Wahlberg was even worse. Jennifer Aniston raised her head happily. She had always regarded Matthew Perry as a good buddy. Matthew Perry's career hadn't been very successful in the past few years, so she was originally wondering if she could ask Eric to help him again. She said, "Eric, really?" "Of course, but as I said just now, the scale of this movie is a bit too big." "Is it going to be vulgar?" Eric shook his head and said, "No, it's just that, well, there are a lot of vulgarities. It's the kind that has no bottom line." "Oh, I happen to have the script here, you can take a look first." As Eric said this, he found the script document for Teddy Bear on his laptop, opened it, and pushed it in front of Jennifer Aniston. Jennifer Aniston was eating oatmeal, so she didn't prepare anything. She held a spoon and ate while reading the script. However, after a few minutes, the girl almost spat out a mouthful of porridge. Fortunately, she turned around in time and took a piece of tissue to cover her mouth, so she didn't embarrass herself. After wiping the corners of her mouth, the girl laughed presumptuously. Ha, ha ha, this is really too vulgar. It's actually on the floor. The guy who wrote this script must be a bastard." Eric was suddenly speechless. He touched his nose and didn't know if he should take the initiative to admit it. Jennifer Aniston was naturally not stupid. She noticed Eric's expression and immediately understood. She laughed even more happily. "Haha, so you are that bastard. I don't know how many people who like teddy bears will scold you after watching the movie in the future." Chapter 941. Eric talked about Teddy Bear with Matthew Perry at the party that night. He had no qualms about this movie that ruined childhood. Instead, he showed great interest in it. The two hit it off immediately. After a symbolic audition, the male lead of Teddy Bear was decided. After finalizing the male lead of Teddy Bear, Eric was in charge of The Lord of the Rings, Iron Man, The Fast and the Furious, Desperate Housewives, and other projects were basically ready. When he rushed to New York to spend Christmas with his women and children, only the female lead of Ring was left undecided among the projects in his hands. While most of the Western countries were immersed in the joy of Christmas, Southeast Asia was still suffering from the devastation of the financial crisis. After resisting with all their might for half a month, South Korea finally gave up protecting the Korean won. In the following 2 weeks, the exchange rate between the Korean won and the US dollar plummeted to 1756 won. Compared to the highest decline a month ago, it had reached a terrifying 73%. East Hampton, Long Island. Because the two little guys were about to go to school, Joanna and Virginia no longer moved between East Hampton and Southampton. Now, a brand new elementary school was being built in East Hampton. When Kevin and Hawaii turned 5 next year, this private school that was built without caring about the cost would almost be on the right track, and the two little guys would be able to enroll. Before that, Joanna and Virginia agreed to let Kevin and Hawaii receive preschool education at home. It was already December 20th, and Eric had just flown in from Los Angeles yesterday. Chris's family also specially came to East Hampton this year to spend Christmas together. After breakfast, Chris came over from his family's manor in East Hampton and talked to Eric about Southeast Asia. It had just snowed heavily on the East Coast. Although it was sunny, the sun didn't have any warmth at all. Eric and Chris didn't hide in the study. Instead, they sat at the round table by the swimming pool in the backyard, enjoying the soft winter sun. Not far away, they could see a big girl and 3 little guys making a snowman. They were Eva Pakula, Kevin, Hawaii, and Emma. I don't know if Mike Tapler of the Apollo Fund is crying in private. He chose to short Thai baht, Indonesian rupiah, and other currencies. This time, he bet that the Korean won wouldn't plummet. It said that he lost $2 billion, and more than half of his early earnings were basically used. A lot of funds that weren't 100% sure about the Korean won's direction regretted it. But they were lucky, at least, they didn't bet wrong. It plummeted 73%. Almost no one expected the Korean won to fall so much in such a short period of time. Many people started to settle when the Korean won was at 1,500 won. If you didn't insist, I would have done the same at that time. But fortunately, I didn't. Now, the funds in our account are close to 800 million. After the final settlement, after deducting all kinds of expenses, the profit is at least $450 million. Chris said excitedly. Eric was actually a little surprised. He originally thought that his reincarnated memory wouldn't be of much help in this financial crisis, but the reality was also beyond his expectations. Take the Korean won for example. If Chris chose to settle when the Korean won was at 1,500 won, the Korean won would depreciate by about 50%. Firefly invested $1 billion in a short position. According to the Korean won exchange rate, they could recover about $550 million. After deducting $300 million, the profit was only $250 million. But under Eric's insistence, Chris waited patiently until the Korean won fell below 1,700 before he settled. At this time, the Korean won short position, which was worth $1 billion, had fallen to $300 million. After the short position was settled, Firefly's profits were close to $800 million. After deducting the principal, the profits were more than double the Korean won's 50% depreciation. During the Southeast Asia financial crisis, Firefly's $700 million investment had increased to $8 billion. This had exceeded Eric's expectations. But a large part of the reason for this was because Firefly had invested very little, and it was easier for them to turn their ship around. If it were a quantum fund, a large fund that could change the financial situation, it would be impossible for them to get such high returns. As they chatted, the twins brought a pot of hot coffee over. Both of them stopped talking, and Eric looked at the twins' necklaces. He noticed an E on their necklaces. This should be the younger sister, Eve. After Eve left, Chris picked up the coffee she had just poured for them and said, "Eric, don't you think there are too many women around you? This is my dream for 2 lifetimes." Eric smiled and picked up his cup of coffee. He pointed to Eva Pakula. "That one does not count." Chris looked at Eve's departing figure and said, "If that's the case, then forget about the rest." "That's right." Eric nodded without hiding anything. Regardless of whether it was a man's possessive nature, although he had no intention of eating the twins, Eric had no intention of giving them away. Chris asked half-jokingly and did not continue the topic. "Speaking of which, there is a fund manager gathering in Manhattan next weekend. Do you want to go? You can go by yourself. I have nothing in common with them." Eric shook his head. He was not interested in this group. "But Soros will be there too," Chris said in an encouraging tone. "The last time I met him, he said that he liked the comments you made about him and hoped to have a chat with you one day." Eric asked, "What comments? I don't remember meeting him before." "I think so. He only mentioned a few sentences in ancient Chinese, and I did not ask him about it." Eric then remembered that after reading Soros' book, Financial Alchemy, he had written on the title page of the book, "Heaven and earth are furnaces, nature is work, yin and yang are carbon, all things are copper." At that time, he felt that it was very appropriate to use these 2 sentences in Pang Fu to describe Soros's turbulence in the international financial market. Eric remembered that he had given the book, Financial Alchemy, to Katzenberg. This matter should have been passed to Soros from Katzenberg. Katzenberg was a New Yorker and often came back. Soros was said to have a lot of friends. The chances of them meeting were quite high. "I remember now." Eric nodded. He was actually quite curious about Soros, so he said, "Next weekend, if there is a chance, let's go and have a look." As the two were chatting, Eric's phone rang. He looked at the caller ID and could not help but smile. He had just thought of Katzenberg and he called. Eric raised his phone and gestured to Chris. He did not avoid it. He leaned back in his chair and pressed the answer button. After exchanging a few pleasantries, Eric asked, "Jeffrey, it should be 6 in the morning in Los Angeles. Is there anything urgent?" On the other end of the phone, Katzenberg said a few words. Eric shook his head and said, "I read some reviews in the newspapers this morning. The reviews for Rush Time 2 are not as good as Starship Troopers. I haven't seen the box office data yet. It should be out on your end, right?" Yesterday was December 19th, Friday. It was also the beginning of the Christmas period. Firefly Group's Rush Time 2 and Sony Pictures' Starship Troopers were released on a large scale yesterday. Los Angeles was 3 hours later than New York. It was already 9 in the morning in New York. It was only 6 in the morning in Los Angeles. It was far from working hours. Eric did not pay attention to the box office data like last year when Titanic was released. Under such circumstances, Firefly's distribution department in Los Angeles would only send the box office data to Eric after work. Eric had already read the reviews for Rush Time 2 and Starship Troopers when he was having breakfast. Overall, Rush Time 2 barely passed the box office. Starship Troopers was much better. The overall rating was more than 7 points. When Katzenberg called to talk about Rush Time 2, Eric thought that the box office was going to fail. He was mentally prepared. But after Katzenberg said a few more words, Eric immediately straightened up. 23. $1 million on the first day. Did you make a mistake? How much was the box office for Starship Troopers on the first day? Eric listened to Katzenberg patiently. He nodded from time to time and chatted for a while before hanging up. He had a complicated look on his face. Chris, who was sitting next to him, had a rough idea. He asked curiously, "What 23? $1 million? Rush Time 2 foot. You should have seen the first one, right? Well, it's a very interesting movie." Chris nodded. However, after being around for so long, Chris was still very familiar with Hollywood. As soon as he finished speaking, he exclaimed in surprise, "You're saying that the first day box office of this movie was $23. $1 million. In Chris's impression, Rush Time 2 could only be regarded as a low to medium budget action comedy. The box office for the first movie was not bad, but the sequel's first day box office of $23.1 million was unexpected. Based on the first day box office data, Rush Time 2 was guaranteed to have a box office of $60 million in the first 3 days. The box office for the first week was likely to exceed $80 million. In Hollywood, the movies that could exceed $80 million in the first week were the blockbusters from the 7 major movie studios. This was because these movies had more publicity and marketing resources. Firefly's blockbuster movie for the Christmas slot should be Jurassic Park 3. Although Rush Time 2 was also highly regarded, it was not as important as Jurassic Park 3. If Firefly had predicted that the box office for Rush Time 2 would be so good, they would not have placed this movie in Jurassic Park 3. This would cause internal competition. Eric looked at Chris's surprised expression and nodded. Everyone did not expect this. New Line's best estimate for the first weekend box office for Rush Time 2 was $30 million. That means the first day box office should be around $10 million. But the actual figure was more than twice our estimate. On the other hand, Sony Pictures' Starship Troopers is in line with our expectations for Rush Time Tube. I thought this movie would beat Rush Time Tube, but it only grossed $8.3 million on its first day. It is less than half of Rush Time Tube. Chris said, "It seems that next week's Jurassic Park 3 will be affected, right?" "It will definitely be affected." Eric smiled bitterly and nodded. To be honest, I was not sure if Jurassic Park 3 could reach $80 million in the first week. After all, this is the third movie. Now, the situation might be worse. Originally, Rush Time 2's box office was expected to be around $50 million in the first week. This way, the box office for the second week will drop to $30 million. This will not affect Jurassic Park 3. But now, if Rush Time 2 exceeds $80 million in the first week, the box office will drop by 40%. That will still be $50 million. This is almost a quarter of the North American box office. Chris listened to Eric and said, "No matter what, this is a good thing." That's right. Anyway, as the boss, I definitely want the box office of Firefly's movies to be as high as possible. Eric could only say so. But in his heart, he made up his mind to expand the movie schedule. At least, he wanted to prevent Firefly's movies from being affected by each other. However, this was easy to say. When it was implemented, it was more complicated to weigh the pros and cons. It was not easy to decide which movies should be placed in less popular slots and which movies should be placed in the best slots to maximize their box office potential. After all, most of the time, Eric only knew the general box office prospects of some movies. Also, as Hollywood's development trajectory deviated from its original trajectory, some of the help from Eric's memories from his previous life would gradually weaken. Chris could also sense the depression in Eric's expression. In fact, he also knew that if Firefly had to choose between Rush Time 2 and Jurassic Park 3, they would definitely prefer Jurassic Park 3. This was because as a blockbuster with special effects, the overseas box office prospects of Jurassic Park 3 were much higher than in North America. Even if the box office performance in North America was slightly weaker, the global box office would still easily crush most blockbusters in Hollywood. However, Rush Time 2 was different. The box office of this series was only in North America. The overseas box office performance was only average in North America. Moreover, the earnings of the Rush Time 2 series from derivatives could not be compared to the Jurassic Park series. Chapter 942. Beyond Everyone's Expectations. After the $23.1 million on the first day, the momentum of Rush Hour 2 did not decrease at all during the weekend. The box office on Saturday hit a new high, reaching $34 million. The box office on Sunday only dropped 19%, earning $95 million. Within 3 days, the box office for Rush Hour 2 had reached $67.4 million. This box office figure easily surpassed the Thanksgiving Day box office figures of Monster Power Company and Night at the Museum 2. It also surpassed Starship Troopers, which was released at the same time. Sony Pictures' $110 million special effects film only earned $22.05 million in the first 3 days. It was even worse than Rush Hour 2's box office on the first day. This result was completely out of everyone's expectations. No one thought that Rush Time 2 would suddenly become so popular, and no one thought that Starship Troopers, which had a much better reputation than Rush Time 2, would have such a terrible box office. Sony Pictures had released Starship Troopers before Firefly Pictures' Jurassic Park 3. Their original goal was to compete with Jurassic Park 3. But in the end, when it was released, it gave people the feeling that they had missed out. Compared to Rush Hour 2's 19% drop on Sunday, Starship Troopers had earned $8.3 million on Friday and $8.28 million on Saturday. The box office on Sunday dropped 34%, earning $5.45 million. Starship Troopers' box office dropped even more on Monday. The box office on Monday dropped 61% compared to the previous day. The box office was only left with $2.1 million. In comparison, even though Rush Hour 2's Monday box office dropped by 51% compared to Sunday, the daily box office was still as high as $9.47 million. It was much higher than any of the daily box office of Starship Troopers. To figure out what was going on, Eric took some time to watch Starship Troopers. He found out that there was nothing wrong with the movie's plot. The special effects were also very good. However, when put together as a whole, It gave people a very uncomfortable feeling because it was difficult for the audience to find anything in the entire movie that made them feel happy. Instead, it was filled with a relatively stiff preaching atmosphere. Although the media and movie reviews explained that this was a satire of fascism, most people were obviously not interested in this kind of satire. What's more, it was still Christmas season. Most of the people who went to the cinema were there for entertainment. Starship Troopers seemed even more out of place. As a result, although the film received good reviews from the film critics, it received extremely cold treatment from the market. On the contrary, compared to the first film, Rush Hour 2 didn't have any new plot. This was why most media outlets gave the film a low score. However, the audience was very receptive to such a kung fu comedy that was full of fighting and laughter. The US $67.4 million box office on the first weekend had already exceeded everyone's expectations. When the US $9.47 million box office on the first day was released, most people realized one thing. Rush Hour 2 might be the first and only movie to break the $100 million box office in the first week at the end of the year. If it was the upcoming Jurassic Park 3, it might not be a big deal. This was because the first two films in the series had broken the $100 million box office record in the first week. However, this honor fell on Rush Hour 2, a film that was expected to only gross around $100 million in North America. This was incredible. Los Angeles, Firefly headquarters, Burbank. Bill Mechanic saw that the driver had parked the car, but he was still reluctant to get out of the car. The driver and assistant sitting in the front seat did not dare to rush him. They all knew that Bill Mechanic had been in a bad mood for the past few days. As the vice chairman of Sony Pictures and the CEO of Columbia Pictures, since Bill Mechanic ascended to this position, he was not as relaxed as when Peter Guber and Chong Peters were in charge of Columbia. On the contrary, the operating situation of the film company was worse than when Peter Guber was in charge. From the summer break to the Christmas break, Sony Pictures had tried to produce two special effects films, Godzilla and Starship Troopers. But now, both films had failed, and they had failed miserably. Bill Mechanic made a name for himself when he was the head of Disney's Family Entertainment Department. Originally, as an executive of Disney, he was able to become the head of one of the Big Seven. At least on the surface, his status was almost the same as Jeffrey Katzenberg, who was the CEO of Firefly, and Michael Eisner, who was the CEO of Universal Pictures. He was very proud of it. But now, he even regretted accepting this job. If he could have stayed at Disney, he felt that he would have been at least a vice president of Firefly. Maybe after Frank Wills retired, he could have competed for the CEO position. Being the president of the Firefly Group was no worse than being the CEO of Columbia Pictures. After sitting in the car for a while, Bill Mechanic had to get off. It was almost time for his meeting with Katzenberg. The consecutive failures of Godzilla and Starship Troopers made Howard Stringer, the CEO of Sony Pictures in the US, anxious. It was inevitable that Sony Pictures would continue to lose money this year. In order to stabilize their position, Sony Pictures had to come up with a new film project as soon as possible. So, Men in Black, Game of the Brave, and Mr. and Mrs. Smith, which Columbia and Firefly had collaborated on, were the best choices to turn the situation around for Sony Pictures. Especially Men in Black, this series was not only very popular, but also had a guaranteed box office. Although Sony Pictures produced and released more than a dozen films a year, the 280 law of the Hollywood film market was very obvious. 80% of a film company's box office and profits were concentrated in the 20% of the best films. If they could start Men in Black 3, although Sony could only get 40% of the profits from this film, it would help Sony Pictures sales for the next 1 or 2 years. Katzenberg did not go out to welcome his former colleague. Bill Mechanic also did not expect this. He knew Katzenberg's character very well. Bill Mechanic brought his assistant to Katzenberg's office. There were still 5 minutes before the meeting time. Waiting in the lounge, Bill Mechanic could not help but feel a little envious when he saw the 4 or 5 assistants and secretaries working around the clock outside Katzenberg's office. Then he laughed at himself. Perhaps, even if he hired 4 or 5 assistants like Katzenberg, Sony Pictures would not have so many things to handle. The current Firefly Group was already a giant corporate aircraft carrier that was bigger than the entire Japanese Sony. Last year, Wall Street valued Firefly Group at $85 billion. This year, the value of Firefly Group would surely rise again. The entire Sony Group had taken advantage of the new technology wave, and its market value had not exceeded $70 billion. Sony Pictures was not even 1/10 of the entire Sony Group. "Mr. Mechanic, you can go in now." Bill Mechanic heard the voice of one of Katzenberg's assistants. He quickly stood up, nodded to the assistant, and walked into Katzenberg's office. When Katzenberg saw Bill Mechanic come in, he put down the phone, got up, and shook hands with him. "Sorry, Bill, I'm a little busy at the end of the year." "It's okay." Bill Mechanic smiled and shook hands with Katzenberg. The two sat down on the sofa in the reception area. The secretary quickly served 2 cups of coffee and then quietly left the office. Bill Mechanic knew Katzenberg's style of doing things, so he didn't beat around the bush. He picked up the coffee and took a symbolic sip before going straight to the point. "So, Jeffrey, what do you think of the proposal I mentioned on the phone last time? In order to promote the production of Men in Black 3, Sony Pictures promised $50 million in advance. At the same time, Sony Pictures reduced the distributor's commission from 15% to 13%. This was only the initial price. Howard Stringer and Bill Mechanic could only accept 10%. With this concession, Sony Pictures might not be able to make any profits from the box office, but the profits from the video and TV broadcast rights were very guaranteed. In this regard, the summer release of Godzilla and Starship Troopers were still in theaters. Sony Pictures might not be able to recoup their costs. When Katzenberg heard Bill Mechanic's words, he shook his head and said, "Bill, Firefly does not care about these concessions from Sony. You should know what we are more concerned about." Bill Mechanic naturally knew that Firefly was more concerned about the cost of Men in Black 3. In the past few years, with the rise of Chris Tucker from the Rush Hour series and the other 2 black actors from the Jedi series, Will Smith was no longer as popular as he was in the original universe. But for the Men in Black series, Will Smith did not have any intention to compromise. Not only did he offer a minimum of $20 million, but he also asked for at least 10% of the box office earnings. The other lead actor of Men in Black, Tommy Lee Jones, asked for a similar amount. If not for Firefly, Sony Pictures would not have hesitated to pay the 2 main leads. After all, Sony Pictures did not have a better choice. Compared to developing Godzilla and Starship Troopers, which had an uncertain future, the possibility of Men in Black series incurring losses was very small. Bill Mechanic hesitated for a moment. Although he felt the possibility was very small, he still said with some anticipation, "Jeffrey, if Firefly is worried that the cost of Men in Black 3 is too high and will affect the profits, Sony can pay a licensing fee and be fully responsible for the production of Men in Black 3. What do you think?" "Bill, Firefly will not give up the production rights of Men in Black 3 series. Also, if they can ensure the quality of the film, Firefly will not be stingy with the production budget." Katzenberg said, "In the end, this is still a matter of controlling the actors' salaries. Ever since Jim Carrey got his first $20 million from Sony for Cable Technician, in recent years, the salaries of Hollywood actors have gone out of control. A large part of the reason is because of Sony." "Jeffrey, I don't think so. Hollywood actors' salaries are rising because of the expansion of the global film market. You can't expect the film companies to make a lot of money but not allow actors to get high salaries, right?" Katzenberg smiled and said, "Bill, I think there is a problem with your position. In addition, the average income of Hollywood actors has not increased much in recent years. There has been a large increase only for a small number of top stars. This is enough to show that your argument is not valid. In short, we can't control the actions of other film companies, but within the scope of Firefly's influence, the highest salary for a big-name actor is only $20 million. If they want to get a share, the fixed salary cannot exceed $10 million, and the share cannot exceed 10% of the production company's global box office revenue. This is the rule. If you can persuade Will Smith and Tommy Lee Jones to accept such conditions, this project can be started at any time." Bill Mechanic said with a bitter face. Jeffrey, this is impossible. Will Smith and Tommy Lee Jones will not give in. Even if you drag it out for 5 years and completely get the rights of the Men in Black series, they will not give in. These two people do not lack film contracts. Not just them. Katzenberg showed a playful smile and said, in the future, all the other A-list stars will definitely lack film contracts if these people continue to ask for unreasonable high salaries. Bill Mechanic did not understand the deeper meaning of Katzenberg's words for a while. He just subconsciously retorted, I don't think it's a big deal. At most, they will stop acting. Do you think these people lack money? The last thing Hollywood lacks is actors. Even if these people leave, there will definitely be other stars who will rise. What's more, this is not a matter of money. Take you as an example. I think you are definitely not short of money now. But if you give up everything in Hollywood to retire now, do you think you can bear it? Bill Mechanic paused and did not answer, but he knew that he definitely could not give up everything in front of him. Hollywood superstars were probably the same. They were used to being in the limelight, used to being surrounded by stars, and used to having hundreds of responses. If one day, all of this suddenly ceased to exist, no one came to compliment you, no one came to pursue you, and the women who used to be able to get you into bed would no longer care about you. Then, even if they had a lot of money, these people would probably go crazy. Shaking his head, Bill Mechanic said, But Jeffrey, your idea is still impossible. Hollywood has more than just Firefly Group. It's always possible to do it one by one. Katzenberg was still smiling. He looked at Bill Mechanic with bright eyes and said, And, you see, the Japanese bought Rockefeller Center back then and now they have sold it back. Universal Pictures, which was annexed, is also back. There are many similar things. In the end, the Japanese wanted to buy the entire United States. It was a joke. Then, it's almost time for Sony to spit out Columbia Pictures. Chapter 943. The car was far away from the headquarters of Firefly Group. Bill Mechanic had not recovered from the shock brought to him by Katzenberg's words. Over the years, Firefly Group had not only successively annexed New Line Cinema, Disney Group, and ABC Group, becoming the largest media giant in Hollywood, but it also secretly controlled Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer Pictures and had a complicated relationship with 20th Century Fox. Bill Mechanic felt that even Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, which was flourishing during the golden age of Hollywood, was probably just as powerful. If Firefly just wanted to take back Columbia Pictures and drive the Japanese out of Hollywood, Bill Mechanic would not be too surprised. In his view, with the current business situation of Sony Pictures, if there were no fundamental changes in the next few years, it was almost inevitable that Sony would withdraw from the film and television industry. At that time, with the strength of Firefly Group, if this company made a move, there would be few competitors inside and outside Hollywood who could compete with them. However, from Katzenberg's words about Firefly's intention to suppress the pay of Hollywood's A-list superstars, Bill Mechanic understood another thing. Firefly Group wanted to become the rule-maker of Hollywood. However, if they wanted to set the rules, even if they controlled half of Hollywood's major film companies, it was still not enough. It was like a fishing net in a river, but the fish in the river could easily swim over from the other side. If Firefly wanted to set the rules, they must have the entire Hollywood in their hands. To achieve this goal, after Sony, Firefly would definitely make a move on the other three companies in Hollywood. In Bill Mechanic's view, among them, only taking back Columbia Pictures was realistic. The other three major film companies, whether it was Universal, Paramount, or Warner, had all become part of large media groups. These media groups, which had gone through difficulties to finally integrate, basically would not sell their film business. In other words, if Firefly wanted to take down the last three film companies, the only way was probably to swallow their parent companies together. Bill Mechanic knew Katzenberg very well. He did not think that Katzenberg would have such unrealistic ambitions. After all, in his view, even if this goal could be achieved, it was estimated that it would be 20 or 30 years later. 30 years. Hollywood. Whose ambition could last for 30 years? Even for old media moguls like Lei Sherdong and Murdoch, the development of Viacom and News Corporation had reached a limit. Even if these two could live for another 30 years and firmly control Viacom and News Corporation in their hands, they actually did not have enough energy to continue developing the industries in their hands. However, as he thought of this, the figure of the young man behind Firefly Group quickly appeared in Bill Mykanik's mind. Thus, amidst all the complicated feelings, he suddenly felt a bit more enlightened. Eric Williams was only 27 years old this year, but Firefly Group had already developed to its current scale. In that case, as long as they persisted in this ambition, it might not be completely impossible for Firefly to control the entire Hollywood. Unknowingly, the car had arrived at the headquarters of Columbia Pictures in Culver City. Hearing his assistant's soft reminder, Bill Mykanik finally came back to his senses. Remembering that Howard Stringer was still waiting for the results of his negotiation with Katzenberg, Bill Mykanik thought for a while and decided not to tell Howard Stringer what Katzenberg said when they met. Howard Stringer was bent on becoming the first non-Japanese CEO of Sony Group, but he still wanted to stay in Hollywood for a long time. Bill Mykanik even thought that maybe he should contact his colleagues from Disney in the future. Then, even if Firefly Group took back Columbia Pictures, there was still a high chance that he would continue to be the CEO of Columbia Pictures and continue to control the company. This year's Christmas was on Thursday. Except for Wednesday, which was affected by Christmas Eve, where the box office of Rush Time 2 fell to US $6.59 million, the box office of Rush Time 2 on the other 3 working days was more than US $9 million. On Christmas Day, the box office of Rush Time 2 even bounced back to US $10.75 million. In the end, the box office of Rush Time 2 reached US $103.52 million in the first week, becoming the only dark horse at the end of 1997 to break US $100 million in the first week. Starship Troopers, which followed closely behind Rush Time 2, stopped at US $29.15 million in the first week, and the box office on the last working day of the first week slipped to the millions. Rush Time 2 broke US $100 million in the first week, and the total box office in North America exceeded US $200 million. The following, Jurassic Park 3, was inevitably affected by Rush Time 2. Since it was inevitable, Eric focused on enjoying the warmth of Christmas. As for the request from Los Angeles that the 2 male leads wanted to increase the box office share on top of the US $20 million salary for the third sequel, Eric did not take it to heart. After Christmas, Jurassic Park 3 was released in North American cinemas on December 26. Since Christmas was over, Eric gradually turned his mind to work. On Saturday morning, because he had an informal video conference with several senior executives of Yahoo to discuss Yahoo's development plan for the next year, Eric sat in his office early and waited for the box office report of Jurassic Park 3 from Los Angeles. Due to the complete explosion of internet technology this year, a large number of new internet companies increased their online advertising efforts regardless of the cost. Therefore, as a portal giant that accounted for more than 70% of the North American market, Yahoo's performance increased significantly this year. Compared to last year's US $194 million in revenue, although the last quarter's results were still being calculated, Yahoo's annual revenue had reached US $435 million in the first 3 quarters, and the annual revenue was likely to be close to US $600 million. However, correspondingly, as the number of internet users in North America and even overseas continued to explode, Yahoo's operating costs also skyrocketed. In the entire 1995 fiscal year, Firefly invested US $500 million in Yahoo. Preliminary statistics showed that compared to last year, Yahoo's loss this year would rise to more than US $300 million. Because it was not a formal meeting, on the other side of the video, several senior executives of Yahoo gathered in the living room of Yahoo's CEO, Ian Gurney. According to the statistics in November, the number of internet users worldwide has exceeded 100 million, and 70% of them are North American internet users, reaching 70 million. Next year, the number of internet users in North America alone will exceed 100 million. In order to maintain Yahoo's rapid expansion in North America and overseas, the company needs at least US $1 billion next year. Eric, I have received more than one phone call to see if Yahoo is going to raise external funds. This time, do you plan to let Firefly invest US $1 billion? According to the agreement, Yahoo already had a share distribution. However, with the US $500 million investment last year, Firefly's shareholding in Yahoo increased to 85%. Based on Yahoo's current valuation of around US $15 billion, if Firefly invested the US $1 billion next year, Firefly's shareholding in Yahoo would increase to more than 90%. I said before Yahoo goes public, we will not attract external investment. So, of course, Eric nodded and said, as for the money, you can discuss it with Chris. This year, Nokia, Cisco, Ltd., and other subsidiaries will bring good profits to Firefly. It is not a problem to support Yahoo's expansion. Let's discuss Yahoo's future development plan. Eric was about to continue when the door was pushed open. Eric did not see anyone at first glance. He straightened his body and noticed his daughter running in. Daddy, this is the biscuit that Mommy just baked. Have a taste. The little guy ran to Eric's side and handed over the biscuit in his hand with an innocent expression. Eric looked at his precious daughter, who was pretending to be a child who didn't know anything. He smiled and picked up his daughter dotingly, placing her on his lap. She had achieved her goal of going to Hawaii. She casually stuffed the cookie into her father's mouth. However, her beautiful eyes were curiously looking at the computer screen. She was a little disappointed when she saw a few faces on the screen. Eric took the cookie that was stuck in his mouth and put it aside. He felt that his daughter was about to run away. He hugged her gently and said, Shasha, be polite. Do you still remember everyone? Say hello. On the other side, Ian Neer, Steve Mitnick, and Tina Brown were watching the situation with great interest. They had already seen Hawaii at Chris' wedding. Although they did not have much contact with it, they were not unfamiliar with it. They only heard from Jeff Bezos that Eric's little girl was very smart. Through the screen, Steve Mitnick could not help but say, Hey, Shasha, I heard you're very smart. Here, let me give you a math problem, okay? Hawaii looked at the few people who were squeezed in front of the computer screen. She tilted her head and said, I got it right. Can you move away from the screen? Everyone laughed. Steve Mitnick asked, What do you plan to do if we move away? Hawaii said, I want to use Yahoo to search for something. Shasha, you know how to use Yahoo, but do you know why Yahoo can find something that interests you? I'm the one who created this search engine. If you can answer my question correctly, I'll tell you. The little girl's beautiful eyes lit up immediately. She nodded gently. Eric saw Joanna leaning in from the door, wanting to take her daughter away. He shook his head to indicate that it was not necessary. Then he said to Steve Mitnick, Steve, I think you'd better come up with a more difficult question. Really? Steve Mitnick looked at Eric. He was a genius to begin with. When he saw Eric nod in confirmation, he said, All right then. Let's use a math question that I did when I was young. Shasha, it's like this. Add from 1 to 100. See if you can get the answer. As soon as Steve Mitnick said that, Tina Brown, who was sitting next to him, protested, Steve, you're deliberately making things difficult for Shasha. She's not even 5 years old. Steve Mitnick raised his hands and explained, But I solved this question when I was 5 years old. As he said that, Steve Mitnick was about to give Hawaii a hint. The little girl's beautiful eyes blinked a few times and she blurted out, 50-50. Everyone was stunned. Steve Mitnick looked at Eric first and said, Don't tell me you taught her this question? Eric shrugged. Although he found it unbelievable, he still smiled and said, No, I don't think her mother would teach her such a boring math question. Hey, it's not boring at all. Steve Mitnick could not help but refute. He turned to look at Hawaii and said in a tone that sounded more like Uncle Lollipop, Shasha, how did you do it? The little girl stretched out her thin index finger and drew in the air. She said, That's right. Add from 1 to 100. You should tell me how Yahoo search works. The few of them did not think that the little girl in front of them had any reason to lie. Therefore, they were even more surprised. They all knew the sum formula of the arithmetical series from 1 to 100. However, if the little guy in front of him didn't use these tricks at all and simply increased from 1 to 100 in just a few seconds and obtained an accurate result, it wasn't something that could be solved with simple mental arithmetic. It also required a strong memory and an even stronger mental arithmetic speed. Steve Mitnick had solved this math problem when he was about the same age as Hawaii, but it took him a whole day of writing and drawing on a piece of paper before he discovered some patterns. That was how he was able to calculate the result with ease. Although he always had a bit of cynicism in his personality, he was actually very proud deep down in his heart. However, the little girl in front of him might be more talented than him. Somewhat unwilling to give up, Steve Mitnick picked up the pen and paper on the table and quickly wrote and drew a few times in his notebook. He made a simple 9-square grid and put it in front of the camera. He said, "Here, Shasha, let's do another math question. This time, it's even more difficult. Look, there are 9 numbers from 1 to 9. Try and see if you can fill in these 9 numbers in these grids so that any 3 numbers connected by a straight line in the grid will add up to the same number." This time, Tina Brown and Ian Neer did not say anything. They only looked at him curiously. Eric thought about it and did not give his daughter any hints. Hawaii was obviously interested. She did not argue with Steve Mitnick for not keeping his promise. Her big eyes stared at the few numbers on the screen curiously. Her little head was obviously buzzing. You're tuning in to the Narrate and Escape YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.